Welcome back to another story on Watch Harry. This time, we're bringing you, what if Petunia hired goblins to scan Harry at age 4 and they found 89 spells Dumbledore used to track him. Your likes fuel our creativity. Subscribe and stay tuned. Here's the story. Chapter 1, The Scan. The letter came on a Tuesday. Petunia Dursley had not been expecting a letter. She had not been expecting anything except the usual Tuesday misery of Vernon's socks needing sorting and Dudley's breakfast requiring 4 separate attempts before he'd consent to eat it. She had certainly not been expecting a cream-colored envelope pushed through the mail slot at precisely 6:47 in the morning, addressed in ink so dark it looked like it had been written with something that bled. She picked it up the way she picked up everything she was suspicious of, with 2 fingers, at arm's length, as though it might bite. Mrs. Petunia Dursley, No. 4, Privet Drive, Surrey. No return address. No postage. The seal on the back was a small embossed symbol she didn't recognize, 2 crossed hammers above what looked like a vault door. She opened it at the kitchen table while Vernon was in the shower and Dudley was watching morning cartoons with the volume turned up loud enough to rattle the windows. The letter was short. Mrs. Dursley, you contacted this office 4 weeks ago regarding anomalous magical activity in your household connected to a minor child in your care. We have reviewed your inquiry. If you wish to proceed with a full diagnostic assessment of the child in question, an appointment has been made for this Thursday at 9 a.m. Present this letter at the main counter of Gringotts Bank, Diagon Alley, London. Ask for Senior Assessor Griphook. This service is rendered at no charge. You are under no obligation. The results of any assessment are the legal property of Gringotts Bank under the Magical Heritage and Lineage Act of 1793, and will be handled according to Goblin law. Come alone with the child. Office of Magical Assessment, Gringotts Bank. Petunia read it twice. Then she folded it very carefully and slid it into the pocket of her dressing gown, and she stood at the kitchen sink looking out at the back garden where Harry, was sitting in the dirt near the flower bed, doing something with a stick. He did that sometimes. Sat in the dirt with sticks, or rocks, or leaves. Never making noise. Never asking for anything. She found it deeply unsettling in a way she couldn't articulate to Vernon, who found everything about the boy unsettling in ways he was perfectly happy to articulate at length and volume. He's odd, Vernon would say, at dinner, as though Harry weren't 3 feet away eating his toast. Unnatural. You can see it. Petunia had stopped correcting him. The truth was she could see it, and seeing it was the problem, because what she saw didn't look dangerous. What she saw looked like a small, thin child with dark hair that never lay flat and green eyes too large for his face, and something behind those eyes that watched everything with a quality of attention that no 4-year-old should have. She had ridden to Gringotts on impulse, at midnight, 3 weeks after Harry had accidentally made the kitchen lights flicker and then looked at his hands with an expression of thoughtful interest rather than fright. She'd written because she needed to know if he was a threat. If he was going to blow up the house one day, or bring those people down on them, or, she had written because she was afraid. She watched him poke the dirt with his stick. He looked up, suddenly, and looked directly at the kitchen window, and she stepped back from the sink even though she knew he couldn't possibly have seen her through the morning glare on the glass. Thursday, the letter had said. She was going to go. Getting into Diagon Alley required the pub, which Petunia hated, and the brick wall, which she hated more, and the general atmosphere of people in robes going about business that seemed calculated to make her feel precisely as ordinary as she was, which she hated most of all. Harry held her hand through all of it without being asked. His hand was small and warm and he looked at everything, the moving posters in the pub, the bricks rearranging themselves, the cobbled alley opening up like a held breath finally released, with that same quality of attention. Not wonder, exactly. More like recognition. Like he was looking at something he already knew the shape of and was simply confirming the details. Don't touch anything, Petunia said. I know, Harry said. He was 4 years and 3 months old and he already spoke like someone who had decided to be patient with the world. Gringotts was white marble and too many steps and doors that made Petunia feel like she was about to be judged for something. The goblins at the counters were exactly as unpleasant looking as she remembered from the one time Lily had brought her here, 20 years ago, when they were teenagers and Lily had wanted to show her something wonderful and Petunia had stood in this same entrance hall feeling exactly this same cold knot of resentment and inadequacy in her chest. She stepped up to the nearest counter. The goblin looked at her with the specific expression of a creature that has been tolerating humans for a very long time and has developed no warmth about it whatsoever. "I have a letter," she said, and held it out. "I'm here to see Senior Assessor Griphook." The goblin took the letter, read it in approximately 2 seconds, and looked at Harry. Harry looked back. Something passed between them that Petunia couldn't identify, some flicker of mutual appraisal, and then the goblin said, "Follow me," and came around the counter without further ceremony. They were led not to a side office but down, which was unexpected. Down a corridor Petunia had never seen, flagged in dark stone, lit by lanterns that burned a steady gold rather than the flickering white of the main hall. The air changed as they descended, cooler, older, carrying a faint metallic smell like old coins and rain. The room they were brought to was circular. The walls were covered in instruments Petunia couldn't name, things that ticked and breathed and reflected light at wrong angles. There was a chair in the center that looked like it had been carved from a single piece of dark wood, worn smooth by use. And there was a goblin already waiting, standing behind a stone table covered in small tools arranged with surgical precision. He was old. That was the first thing Petunia registered. Goblins always looked ancient to her, with their long fingers and lined faces, but this one wore his age differently, not like deterioration but like accumulation, like something that had been adding layers for centuries and was now extremely dense. "Mrs. Dursley," he said. Not a greeting. An acknowledgement. "I am Griphook, Senior Assessor. Please sit." He gestured to a chair against the wall that Petunia hadn't noticed. Then he looked at Harry. "And you, young one, will need to sit here." He indicated the carved chair in the center. Harry walked to it and climbed up without hesitation. His feet didn't reach the floor. He sat with his hands in his lap and looked at Griphook with calm attention. "Do you know why you're here?" Griphook asked him. "Aunt Petunia thinks something is wrong with me," Harry said. Petunia's mouth tightened. "I think something is unusual, something is very unusual," Harry said, without any particular emphasis, as though he were reporting a weather observation. "I made the lights flicker. I do it sometimes when I'm thinking about something else." Griphook looked at him for a long moment. "Does it frighten you?" "No," Harry said. "Should it?" Griphook made a sound that was probably not a laugh but might have been adjacent to one. He picked up the first of his instruments, a thin rod of dark metal, and said, "This will not hurt. You may feel warmth, or pressure. Tell me if it becomes uncomfortable." He began. Petunia watched. She wasn't sure what she'd expected, perhaps something like a medical exam, something orderly and quickly concluded. What she got was Griphook moving around the chair in slow circuits, holding different instruments at different angles, his expression shifting from professional neutrality into something else. Something she couldn't read. His movements became more deliberate. More careful. He put one instrument down and picked up another. Then another. After 20 minutes, he stopped. He stood very still with his back to both of them. "Mrs. Dursley," he said. His voice had changed. "I need to ask you to wait here. I will return shortly." "Is something wrong?" she said. "What did you? I will return shortly." He was already at the door. "Do not leave this room." He left. The door closed behind him. In the silence, Petunia could hear the instruments on the walls ticking. "Aunt Petunia," Harry said. She looked at him. He was still sitting in the chair with his hands in his lap, but he was looking at where Griphook had been standing with that expression, the watching one, the thinking one. "What?" she said. He found something, Harry said. Something that upset him. And I don't think it was about the lights. Petunia had no answer for that, so she sat in her chair and looked at her hands and waited. Griphook came back in 11 minutes, and he did not come back alone. The goblin who walked in behind him was taller than most, nearly 4 feet, which was considerable, and wore clothing that was clearly not for the benefit of human visitors. Heavy dark fabric, something metallic at the cuffs and collar, a chain of office around his neck that looked like it weighed more than Harry. His face was the kind of face that had decided long ago not to be readable. "Mrs. Dursley," Griphook said, "this is Director Ragnarok. He oversees all matters of magical assessment and heritage law." Ragnarok looked at Petunia with eyes the color of old amber and said, "You brought this child here for a routine scan." "Yes," she said. "And you had no prior knowledge of what would be found?" "No. You understand that the results of this scan are now the legal responsibility of Gringotts Bank?" "Your letter said, yes." He cut her off, not rudely, but with the efficiency of someone who does not enjoy repeating himself. "I am confirming that you understand." He moved to the stone table and picked up what appeared to be a rolled scroll, though it was unlike any paper she'd seen, pale gold, and covered in marks that shifted when she tried to look directly at them. He set it on the table and unrolled it slowly. "This is the diagnostic record. A full accounting of every magical signature present in or on this child." "And?" Petunia said. "We found 89, Ragnarok said. Silence. 89 what?" Petunia said. "Spells," Ragnarok said. "Enchantments. Active, anchored magical constructs embedded in the child's magical core, his physical body, his memory, and his emotional and psychological centers." He paused, and his amber eyes moved to Harry, who was watching him with absolute stillness. 89. Petunia felt the room tilt slightly. That can't be, he's 4 years old." "Yes," Ragnarok said. "He is." "What kind of spells?" Harry asked. Ragnarok looked at him, and something in his face, not softening exactly, but adjusting, making room for the fact that the child he was speaking to was clearly going to need to be spoken to directly. "Various kinds," he said. "I will explain them to you when you are somewhat older and better equipped to. What kind of spells?" Harry said again. Same voice. Same stillness. Just the question, patient and immovable. Ragnarok was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Tracking charms. 7 of them, anchored to your magical signature so that your location can be known at all times. Compulsion enchantments, spells designed to influence your choices and emotional responses in directions predetermined by the caster. Power suppressors. Memory blocks on several incidents you would otherwise remember clearly. A loyalty binding that would compel you toward a specific individual regardless of your own feelings." He paused. "And a soul leash." The room was very quiet. "What's a soul leash?" Harry asked. "It is a construct that ties your magical core and your life force to another person's. If that person commands it, they can drain your magical strength. And when they choose, if they choose, they can sever it in a way that would kill you." Petunia made a sound she was not proud of. Something between a gasp and a word she'd have to apologize for later if anyone had heard it. Her hand went to her mouth. She stared at Harry, who was sitting in the chair with his feet not touching the floor, digesting this information with the same expression he wore when she told him not to track mud on the carpet. "Who cast them?" Harry said. "We do not yet know all of the casters," Ragnarok said. "The diagnostic identifies the nature and age of the enchantments. Identifying the caster requires further analysis." However, he paused in a way that told Petunia he was choosing words carefully. "The majority of these enchantments share a single magical signature. A very distinctive one, which the Gringotts archives can cross-reference." "Who?" Harry said. "Harry," Petunia started. The signature, Ragnox said, belongs to Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore, headmaster of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, supreme mugwump of the International Confederation of Wizards, former chief warlock of the Wizengamot. The name fell into the room like a stone into still water. Petunia had heard it before. She had heard it the night Dumbledore left Harry on her doorstep. She had looked out her bedroom window and seen him standing under the street lamp with that woman in the cat-shaped glasses, and she had known, in the wordless way that she sometimes knew things she refused to examine, that this was someone with power over her life. She had not known exactly how right she was. All of them? Petunia said, and she was surprised to find her voice was steady. All 89? No, Ragnox said. 73 bear his signature. The remaining 16 appear to have been cast by at least 2 other individuals, whom we are still identifying. But 73 enchantments of this magnitude and variety, placed on a single child, for the first time, something appeared in his face that was undeniably emotion. Ancient and cold and very, very resolved. Under Goblin law, under the Magical Heritage and Lineage Act, and under the International Accords of Magical Children's Rights, this constitutes a crime of the highest order. What happens now? Harry asked. Now, Ragnox said, we remove them. All 89. All 89. Harry nodded, as though this were a reasonable and satisfying answer. Will it hurt? Yes, Ragnox said, and Petunia appreciated, in a distant way, that he did not lie. Some of them will be uncomfortable to remove. Several of the deeper constructs will be painful. You may feel ill afterward. But you will be, he stopped. Started again. You will feel more like yourself afterward than you have ever felt. Harry thought about this. Okay, he said. When do we start? They didn't start that day. The removal process, Griphook explained to Petunia while Ragnox took Harry to a separate consultation room with 3 other goblins and what appeared to be several hundred years' worth of equipment, required preparation. The enchantments were layered in a specific order. Some of them were anchored to each other. Remove one incorrectly and it could trigger a cascade that would damage the underlying magical structures. They needed to map every single one before they could touch any of them. How long? Petunia asked. A week for the mapping. The removal itself, in stages, will take several weeks after that. Possibly 2 months. He needs to come back here No, Griphook said. He will need to stay here. Petunia blinked. In the bank? In the Gringotts' residential quarters. We have them, they are rarely used by humans, but they exist. He looked at her with his flat, professional gaze. He will be safe. Safer here than anywhere else, in fact, while he is in this vulnerable state. During the removal process his magical core will be open and exposed. He cannot be anywhere that the primary caster could reach him. The primary caster. Dumbledore. Does Dumbledore know, she said. That we're here? That you found, not yet, Griphook said. Several of the tracking charms are still active. We have placed a dampening field around this room, and around the consultation room, which prevents them from transmitting. When we begin the removal, we will need to take them down in a specific sequence that does not alert the monitoring end. We are experienced in this. His tone on that last sentence was very dry. This isn't the first time you've done this, Petunia said slowly. Griphook looked at her. We have removed illegal magical constructs from children before, Mrs. Dursley. It is, unfortunately, not unheard of. But not this many. He was quiet for a moment. No. Not this many. Petunia sat with that. She was not, she told herself, doing this for Harry. She was doing this because 89 spells on a 4-year-old was a threat to her household. To her family's safety. If Dumbledore had done this, Dumbledore could undo it or add to it at any time, which meant she had a wizard with apparently unlimited power and no apparent ethical constraints making choices about a child living in her house, and that was completely unacceptable. She was absolutely not doing this because she'd sat in this room and watched Ragnarok tell a 4-year-old about a soul leash, and the child had nodded and asked will it hurt with the calm of someone who expected to be hurt and had already decided it didn't matter. She was not doing this for sentiment. "What do I tell my husband?" she said. "As little as possible would be advisable," Griphook said. She almost laughed. "How do I explain that I've left the boy in a goblin bank for 2 months? "Mrs. Dursley," Griphook said, and there was something in his voice, not warmth, goblins didn't do warmth, but something like a grudging respect for pragmatism. "In my experience, people rarely ask detailed questions about things they prefer not to know." She thought of Vernon, of the look on his face every time Harry was in the room, of the way he'd started talking about solutions to the Harry situation at the dinner table, and she nodded once. "I'll need to go home and get some of his things," she said. "Clothes. Toothbrush. We can provide, I'll get them myself," she said. "I'll be back within 2 hours." She stood up. Then she stopped at the door. "Griphook," she said, without turning around. "The soul leash. If Dumbledore had, if he'd used it to kill him, would he have been able to do it from a distance?" A pause. "Yes. At any time." "Yes. While Harry was sleeping in his bed." "While he was," she stopped. "Yes. At any time." Another pause. "Yes." She put her hand on the door and pushed it open and walked out into the lantern-lit corridor, and she kept walking until she found a corner that was empty, and she stood there for a moment looking at the stone wall and doing something complicated and private that she would never in her life have described as crying. Then she straightened her spine, smoothed her hands down the front of her coat, and went to get Harry's things. The consultation room had a low table and several goblins with instruments and Harry in the center of it all, which he appeared to find entirely manageable. Ragnarok stood at the head of the table watching as 3 junior assessors worked through a secondary diagnostic, this one more granular, tracing the roots and anchor points of each of the 89 enchantments. Harry watched the instruments move around him with genuine interest. "The one on my left wrist," he said. "It's different from the others." The 3 junior assessors looked at each other. Then at Ragnarok. Ragnarok came around the table. "What do you mean, different?" "It feels heavier," Harry said, and he touched his left wrist absently with his right hand. "Like it's pulling toward something. The others don't do that." He looked up at Ragnarok. "What is it?" Ragnarok looked at the diagnostic overlay, a faint gold projection of Harry's magical signature that hung in the air above the table like a map in 3 dimensions. He looked for a long time. "That," he said finally, "is the soul leash anchor point. The terminus. What you feel is the line connecting you to its other end." He paused. "You can feel it. Can't everyone feel things like that?" "No," Ragnarok said. "No, they cannot." He was quiet for a moment. Then, to no one in particular, he said something in gobbledygook that the junior assessors apparently understood, because they all stopped what they were doing and looked at the projection with new attention. "What did you say?" Harry asked. "I said," Ragnarok said, "that your magical core, even suppressed as it currently is considerably more sensitive and aware than the enchantments are designed to account for." He looked at Harry with his amber eyes. "Whoever placed these on you expected a child who would not be able to perceive them. They were mistaken." Harry looked at his wrist. The skin was smooth and unmarked. "How long have they been there?" "The oldest enchantments were placed when you were approximately 15 months old," Ragnarok said. Harry was quiet for a moment, doing maths. "So basically my whole life." "Essentially, yes. And they've been making me," he frowned, feeling for the right word, "smaller than I actually am." In every sense, Ragnar said. Something moved through Harry's face, not anger, not yet, not quite. More like the expression of someone who has picked up a stone and turned it over and found something unexpected underneath, and has not yet decided what to do about it. He set the stone down very carefully and looked at Ragnar. Then I want them off, he said. All of them. As fast as you can manage. We will be methodical, Ragnar said. Fast is less important than correct. Okay, Harry said. Correct. But not slow. Ragnar looked at him for a long moment. This small boy with his large eyes and his bare feet, he'd taken off his shoes at some point, for reasons unclear, and his absolute absence of the deference that human children typically performed for adults who were obviously in authority, and made a decision. No, he said. Not slow. Petunia came back in an hour and 40 minutes with a bag that held 3 changes of clothes, Harry's toothbrush and a tube of toothpaste, one worn stuffed owl that had been Lily's as a child and that Harry slept with and that Petunia had very deliberately never thrown away, and a library book about dinosaurs that was 2 weeks overdue and that Harry had been reading and rereading because Petunia bought him books but not frequently enough. She had also, for reasons she examined very briefly and then stopped examining, brought his favorite mug from the kitchen cupboard. The one with the chipped handle that had a cartoon hedgehog on the side. She handed the bag to Griphook, who took it without comment. There's a stuffed owl in there, she said. I see it. He sleeps with it. He won't say anything about it, he won't ask for it, but he sleeps better with it. Griphook looked at her. I'm just making sure you know, she said. That's all. I will make sure it is accessible, Griphook said. She nodded. She looked down the corridor toward where she knew Harry was sitting in that room with those instruments and that ancient, amber-eyed goblin and 89 reasons she hadn't asked enough questions about what was happening under her own roof. He doesn't, she stopped. Started again. He doesn't know how to ask for things. He's been taught, not deliberately, or, she stopped. He won't complain. If something hurts or if he needs something, he won't say. You should know that. We will pay attention regardless, Griphook said. Good. She pulled her handbag up on her shoulder. I'll call to check on him. We will update you daily. She walked back up the corridor toward the main hall and the noise and the light, and she did not look back, which was the only way she knew how to do difficult things, by not looking at them directly, by keeping her eyes on the next step, by moving forward with the particular rigid grace of someone who has decided to do what is necessary and is not going to think too hard about the feelings that came with it. They began the mapping that same evening. Harry sat in the carved chair while instruments moved around him and Ragnar worked at the stone table, cross-referencing what the diagnostic showed against the Gringotts archives. The gold projection of Harry's magical signature hung in the air and slowly, as the hours passed, it became more detailed, the enchantments picked out in different colors, their anchor points marked, their connections to each other traced in thin gold lines like a particularly terrible spider's web. 73 in Dumbledore's signature. Silver, in the display. 11 in another signature, which the archive identified, by morning, as belonging to someone named Severus Snape. 5 in a third, which took longer, which Ragnar looked at for a very long time before he said anything. These 5, he said to Griphook, when Harry was asleep in the chair, finally, the stuffed owl tucked against his side where one of the junior assessors had quietly placed it. Do you see the construction method? Griphook looked. That's, yes, Ragnar said. He placed those on his own son. We will confirm it, Ragnar said. But yes. I believe so. They looked at the 5 marks, not the silver of Dumbledore's work, not the dark blue of Snape's, but a deep, bruised red, aching looking even in the magical display. James Potter is dead, Griphook said. I know, Ragnar said. That does not mean his work is inert. He looked at the 5 red marks for a long time. Some of these are protective. Genuine protections, not controls. He was quiet. He meant them as armor. But they're layered under Dumbledore's work. Suppressed by it. Yes. Ragnar's jaw tightened, an expression, in goblin terms, that communicated something between grief and fury. The armor was buried under the cage. He turned back to the table. We remove the cage first. We are careful with the armor. If some of what James Potter placed can be preserved and reshaped, we will do it. Griphook nodded. The instruments ticked and breathed. Harry slept with the owl tucked against his ribs, and the gold projection of his magical signature hung in the air above him, dense with markers, complex as a city, and somewhere in the center of it, under all the silver and blue and red, something pulsed with a quiet, steady light that the instruments catalogued under a heading that made every goblin in the room go very still when they saw it. Core classification, undefined. Not unranked. Not immeasurable. Undefined, meaning the classification system did not have a category that contained it. Ragnar looked at it for a long time. Then he covered the display with a cloth, not to hide it, but to let the boy sleep without the gold light in his face, and sent a sealed message to 7 goblins across 3 countries, and went back to work. Outside, London continued its unremarkable Tuesday evening. Cars and buses, chip paper on the pavement, the smell of rain and exhaust. The city had no idea. Somewhere above his vault, Harry Potter slept in a goblin bank with a stuffed owl and a magical core that no one had ever managed to name, and for the first time in his 4-year life, the instruments around him were not measuring how to control him. They were measuring how to set him free. Chapter 2, What the Bones Remember. The first removal happened on a Wednesday. Not all 89, not even close. Ragnar had spent 6 days mapping, cross-referencing, arguing with 2 senior archivists from the Edinburgh branch who'd been brought in specifically because of the soul leash, and sleeping approximately 3 hours a night, which was normal for him. The map was complete. The sequence was established. They would work from the outside in, taking the surveillance enchantments first, then the compulsions, then the suppressors, then the memory blocks, and leaving the soul leash for last because it required a separate ritual entirely, and Ragnar intended to be very well rested when he touched it. The tracking charms came off on Wednesday morning. Harry sat in the chair. Ragnar stood before him with a tool that looked something like a tuning fork made of black iron, and he worked with the precise, unhurried movements of someone who had been doing delicate things with his hands for longer than most civilizations had existed. "Tell me what you feel," Ragnar said, and touched the first anchor point. "Warm," Harry said. Then, like something, pulling loose. He blinked. "Like a splinter coming out." "Good. That is accurate." Ragnar moved to the second. Again. Same. But faster this time. The 7 tracking charms came out in 40 minutes. Harry sat very still through all of them, reporting his sensations in the careful, factual way he'd apparently decided was the correct approach to this experience, and Ragnar worked without pause, and when it was done Harry sat for a moment and breathed and said, "They're gone." "Yes. I didn't know they were there before," he said, "but now that they're gone I can tell they were." "That's strange." "It is common," Ragnar said. "You become accustomed to a weight and stop noticing it. It is only when the weight is lifted that you feel how heavy it was." Harry thought about this for a moment. Then he said, "Can we do more today?" "Tomorrow," Ragnar said. "Your core needs time to adjust between removals." "Why?" "Because the enchantments have been part of your magical architecture for years. Your core has built itself around them, the way a tree grows around a fence post. Remove the fence post, and the tree needs time to fill in the gap and grow in the correct shape. Do it too fast, and the gaps don't fill properly." Harry looked at him. "So I'm a tree." "You are significantly more complicated than a tree. But basically a tree." Ragnar looked at him with the expression he was developing specifically for Harry, which was different from every other expression in his repertoire. It contained, if pressed, a reluctant acknowledgement that he was being gently and expertly needled by a 4-year-old. "Rest," he said. "I will see you tomorrow." Harry's room in the Gringotts' residential quarters was not what anyone would have expected. Petunia had expected something dungeon-like and damp. Harry had expected something minimal and purposeful. What they had was a room carved from warm sandstone deep in the mountain above the vaults, with a ceiling that arched like a cathedral and walls inlaid with veins of something that caught the lamplight and glowed faintly amber. The bed was a proper one, wide and high off the floor, with blankets that were heavier than anything at Privet Drive. There was a desk, a shelf of books, all in gobbledygook, which Harry couldn't read, but he liked the look of them, and a window that looked out not onto any outside view but onto a constructed scene, hills in firelight, moving slowly as though caught in a real wind. He sat at the desk on Wednesday evening with a piece of parchment and a goblin-made pen that didn't require dipping, and he made a list. Not because anyone asked him to. Because organizing things on paper was how he processed them, and he had a lot to process. He wrote, "Things I know. 1. There were 89 spells on me. 2. Most of them were put there by Dumbledore. 3. Dumbledore is the headmaster of the magic school. 4. He put tracking charms so he always knew where I was. 5. He put compulsions to make me feel certain ways. 6. He put a soul leash, which can kill me. 7. Why?" He looked at the last item, which wasn't really a list item so much as the only question that mattered. He put a circle around it. Then he wrote underneath, "Things I don't know. 1. Why?" He put the pen down. The constructed window showed the firelit hills shifting in a wind he couldn't feel, and somewhere in the lower levels of the building the instruments were ticking in the mapping room, still recording, still watching. He picked the pen back up and added a third section. Things to ask Ragnarok. 1. Why? Ragnarok came to find him the next morning before the scheduled removal session, which told Harry that something had happened. In his limited but apparently quite well-developed ability to read people, Harry had established that Ragnarok operated on a strict internal schedule and deviated from it only when something required deviation. Coming to Harry's room rather than waiting for Harry to come to the assessment room was a deviation. "Sit down," Ragnarok said, which was always his version of good morning. Harry sat on the bed. Ragnarok pulled the desk chair over and sat across from him. "2 things," Ragnarok said. "First, the archivists completed overnight analysis of your full diagnostic. They have preliminary identifications on all 3 casters." He paused. "The 11 enchantments that are not Dumbledore's work and not the 5 from your father, those were cast by Severus Snape, a potions professor at Hogwarts." Harry filed this away. "What kind were his?" 8 of the 11 are monitoring enchantments, simpler than Dumbledore's, designed to feed him data about your physical state and magical activity. The other 3 are," Ragnarok paused, choosing, "psychological in nature. Designed to generate low-level distress. Anxiety. A sense of unworthiness." Harry was very still. "He wanted me to feel bad about myself. The intent is not entirely clear. It is possible they were placed on Dumbledore's instruction. It is possible Snape had his own reasons." Ragnarok's jaw tightened. "Either way, they come off today." "Good," Harry said, and there was something in his voice that was not the usual measured calm, something brighter and harder, like a stone that had caught light. "What's the second thing?" Ragnarok looked at him steadily. "Dumbledore knows you are here." The room was quiet. "How?" Harry asked. "We removed the tracking charms 2 days ago. He would have noticed the loss of their signal. He has resources that allowed him to trace your last known location before the signal was lost." Ragnarok paused. "He arrived at the main counter at 7 o'clock this morning." "What did you tell him?" "That Gringotts does not discuss the business of its clients." That any inquiry regarding a client would need to be made in writing to the Office of Legal Affairs and would receive a response in the standard timeframe of 6 to 8 weeks. Harry looked at him. He didn't accept that. He did not, Ragnarok said, and there was a quality to his stillness that told Harry this was the part of the story he was managing. He attempted to use legilimency on the counter-goblin. What's legilimency? Mind reading, Ragnarok said. Magical intrusion into another's thoughts. On a goblin. On a goblin, Ragnarok confirmed, and the word goblin had the weight of a statement about exactly how badly Dumbledore had miscalculated. He was escorted from the building. He is currently outside, on the steps, and has been there for 2 hours. Outside, Harry said. On the steps. Yes. Can he come in? Not while you are under goblin protection. Ragnarok said this with the finality of someone describing a law of physics. Gringotts is sovereign territory. It has been since 1752. No magical compulsion, detection spell, or intrusion can operate within these walls without explicit goblin permission. He cannot reach you here. He cannot see you here. He cannot, he paused, and said the next words very precisely, do anything here except stand on our steps and think about the choices that brought him to this position. Harry looked at the constructed window. The firelit hills. He's going to try other things, he said. Yes. He's smart. Extraordinarily, Ragnarok agreed. He is also, in this matter, operating from a position of significant disadvantage, because everything he does to recover control of you is itself evidence of the crime we are in the process of documenting. Ragnarok looked at Harry with something that was, unmistakably, satisfaction. Every move he makes tightens the legal case against him. Harry thought about this. So you want him to try? I want him to continue to be precisely who he is, Ragnarok said. Which is a man who believes the rules do not apply to him. Men like that tend to prove their own guilt very efficiently. Harry nodded slowly. Then he said, Ragnarok. Why did he do it? Not the how, not the mechanism. Why does Dumbledore want to control me? Ragnarok looked at him for a long time. Outside, or rather on the constructed outside the window showed, a branch moved in the artificial wind. That question, he said, connects to several things we have not yet discussed. Things that involve your family, your history, and a conflict in the magical world that you are, by various accounts and various people's intentions, central to. I know I'm central to something, Harry said. I've known that for a while. Aunt Petunia looks at me like I'm a bomb sometimes. You are, in certain people's estimation, something like a weapon, Ragnarok said. He watched Harry's face carefully as he said it. Someone spent a great deal of effort ensuring that weapon would fire in a specific direction, at a specific time, in a specific way. Removing these enchantments does not change the fact that there are people in the magical world who will continue to want that. It changes only whether they have the means to enforce it. So taking the spells off me is taking the remote control away, Harry said. Yes, Ragnarok said, with the slight pause of someone recalibrating for the vocabulary of a 4-year-old who watches television. That is an accurate summary. And then what? They just ask nicely. Some will, Ragnarok said. Some will attempt other methods. And some, a very few, but they exist, will accept that you are a person and not a weapon and will want to know what you want. Harry absorbed this. He looked at his list on the desk, with Y circled 3 times. Tell me the rest, he said. When I'm old enough. Tell me all of it. I will, Ragnarok said. Promise. The real version, not the children's version. I promise, Ragnarok said, to tell you the truth as completely as I am able to, at every stage of your development at which you can use it. He paused. That is the most honest version of that promise I can make. Harry considered this. That's fair, he said. Okay. Can we do the Snape ones today? I want those off first. They came off in an hour. The 8 monitoring enchantments unwound cleanly enough, but the 3 psychological ones were different, denser, more deeply embedded, woven into the limbic architecture of Harry's emotional processing in a way that required Ragnarok to work with a patience and precision that had the junior assessors barely breathing. The second one, when it released, made Harry gasp. Not cry, he didn't cry, and Ragnarok noticed this and filed it away alongside the fact that Harry never complained, never asked for things, and had spent 3 days in an unfamiliar environment underground with near strangers without once showing what a child his age should by all rights be showing, which was fear. What he showed instead was attention. Watchfulness. The specific alertness of something that has learned that its environment is unpredictable and has decided that the correct response to unpredictability is to observe everything and be surprised by nothing. When the second psychological enchantment came off, Harry gasped, and then his face did something complicated and quick that it took Ragnarok a moment to identify. Relief. Not just the physical relief of a pain ceasing. Something deeper. Something that had been pressing down on him from the inside, a constant low-level weight that he had never known wasn't his, and now it was gone and the absence of it was enormous. Harry, Ragnarok said quietly. I'm fine, Harry said, immediately. I know, Ragnarok said. What did you feel? Harry looked at his hands. Like I'd been carrying something and put it down. He swallowed. I didn't know it wasn't mine. Ragnarok did not say I know again because he'd already said it and repeating it would be condescension. Instead he said, the third one may be similar. Do you want to continue today or wait? Continue, Harry said. Are you certain? The longer it's on me, Harry said, the longer it was real. He looked up. Take it off. Ragnarok took it off. This time Harry went very quiet afterward, in a way that lasted several minutes, and the junior assessors looked at each other and at Ragnarok, and Ragnarok looked only at Harry, and nobody said anything until Harry drew a long breath and said, okay. What's next on the list? The compulsions were harder. They started on the 4th day and worked through them over the course of a week, 2 or 3 per session, and the difficulty was not the pain, though some of them were painful, a deep, structural ache like something being pulled out of bone, but the disorientation. Compulsion enchantments, Ragnarok explained, don't feel like external commands. They feel like your own thoughts. Your own preferences. Your own feelings. How do you know? Harry asked, on the 6th day, when they'd taken off 4 and he was lying on the chair rather than sitting up, because sitting up had stopped being an option about halfway through, which things are yours and which things were put there. That, Ragnarok said, sitting beside him rather than standing over him, which was a departure from procedure that the junior assessors all pretended not to notice, is a question that takes time to answer. In the immediate term, you will feel uncertain. Things you thought you liked, you may find you're indifferent to. Things you thought you feared, you may find you're not afraid of. He paused. Some things that were placed there may, by coincidence, align with who you actually are. Those will feel unchanged. The ones that don't belong will feel absent. Like words you'd memorized that you no longer need. What did he want me to feel? Harry asked. The ones he put there. What were they making me want? Ragnarok was quiet for a moment. Certain compulsions were designed to generate feelings of trust and admiration toward Dumbledore specifically. A sense that he was benevolent. Safe. To be deferred to. He paused. Others were designed to generate an aversion to questioning authority in general. A tendency toward self-sacrifice. An instinct to put others before yourself in ways that would, in specific circumstances, lead to, he stopped. Lead to what? Harry said, eyes on the ceiling. Lead to a willingness to die, Ragnarok said, if the person you were compelled to trust told you it was necessary. The ceiling was carved stone, smoothly arched. Harry stared at it. He was building me to want to die for him, Harry said. For a cause he would frame in terms that made the sacrifice feel noble, Ragnarok said carefully. He is not a man who thinks in terms of cruelty. He thinks in terms of necessity. In his view, what he placed in you was not. I don't care what it was in his view, Harry said, and his voice was very quiet and very steady. I care what it was. Ragnarok was quiet. It was a chain, Harry said. Dressed up as a personality. Yes, Ragnarok said. It was. They were quiet together for a while. Then Harry said, "Okay. What's next?" It was during the second week that the inheritance test happened. It wasn't planned, or rather, it was on Ragnarok's list as a thing that would need to happen eventually, but eventually arrived sooner than expected because of the soul leash. The preliminary work on mapping the leash's anchor structure had turned up anomalies in Harry's lineage records that needed clarification before they could proceed with the more sensitive removals. Specifically, there were 3 separate vaults at Gringotts that had flagged Harry's presence in the building, their wards responding to the proximity of their rightful heir, and the conflict between the competing inheritance claims was causing interference in the diagnostic field. It is simpler, Griphook said, to do the inheritance test now and resolve the lineage questions before we proceed. What does an inheritance test involve? Harry asked. Blood, Griphook said. Yours, on this parchment. The parchment does the rest. Harry looked at the parchment, which was old and large and had the particular quality of things that have been waiting a very long time to be used. He looked at the small silver instrument Griphook was holding, which was clearly for the blood taking. He held out his hand. The prick was brief. 3 drops of blood fell onto the parchment and spread in ways that defied the usual behavior of blood on paper, moving deliberately, tracing lines, forming words in a script that slowly resolved itself from something ancient into something legible. Harry watched it happen. Harry James Potter, it wrote first, which he knew. Son of James Charles Potter and Lily Jade Potter née Evans, which he also knew, more or less. Heir to the ancient and noble house of Potter, which he had not known, but which felt like a fact being confirmed rather than a surprise. Heir to the ancient and noble house of Black through maternal designation by Doria Potter née Black. Wait, Harry said. Black? A secondary line, Griphook said. Through your grandmother. It gives you claim to the Black family seat if the primary line. He stopped, because the parchment was still writing. Heir to the ancient and noble house of Peveril, primary line, unbroken. The junior assessors went very still. Griphook looked at the parchment and then at Ragnarok, who had come to read over Harry's shoulder. The Peverils have been considered extinct for 6 centuries, Griphook said, in the tone of someone stating a fact they are simultaneously in the process of revising. Apparently not, Ragnarok said. The parchment was still writing. Heir to the elemental accord of the founders through the Potter-Gryffindor descendant line, that's Hogwarts, Harry said. Gryffindor was one of the founders. Yes, Ragnarok said. So I have, what, a seat on the school's board? You have considerably more than that, legally speaking, Ragnarok said, but that is a conversation for another time. Magical core classification, the parchment wrote, and then paused, the ink pooling as though the parchment itself was deciding how to phrase the next part. Primal. Nobody said anything for a moment. What does that mean? Harry asked. Ragnarok sat down, which he virtually never did unless he was doing delicate work or processing something significant. He sat down, and he looked at the word primal on the parchment, and he said, it means that your magical core does not belong to any of the standard classifications. It predates them. It is the kind of magical potential that the classification system was originally invented to track, and then revised to exclude, because it had not been seen in so long that the architects of the system decided it no longer existed. But it does exist, Harry said. Apparently in me. Apparently in you, Ragnarok confirmed. What does it mean practically? What can I do that other people can't? We don't know yet, Ragnarok said. Partly because the suppressors are still active and your core has never been allowed to express itself freely. When we finish the removals, he paused. We will find out together. Harry looked at the parchment. At the word primal. He didn't look odd, or frightened, or particularly puffed up about it. He looked like someone who has received information and is filing it next to everything else he's received, organizing it methodically, seeing how it connects. "Okay," he said. "What's next?" Dumbledore came back on the 9th day. He didn't come to the counter this time. He sent a letter, officially, formally, on Hogwarts letterhead, addressed to the director of Gringotts Bank, requesting an urgent meeting regarding a matter of significant national and magical concern involving the welfare of a minor child currently believed to be on the premises. Ragnarok read it at his desk. He read it twice. Then he wrote a response. "Dear Headmaster Dumbledore, thank you for your correspondence. Gringotts Bank notes your inquiry and advises you that the welfare of all clients, minor or otherwise, is of paramount importance to this institution and is handled according to our legal and ethical obligations under the Magical Heritage and Lineage Act of 1793, the International Accords of Magical Children's Rights, and Goblin law as established by the Treaty of 1752. We further note that Gringotts Bank is currently in possession of a complete diagnostic record of a minor client in our protection, documenting the presence of 73 illegally cast enchantments bearing your specific magical signature, 11 bearing the signature of Severus Snape, acting under what we believe to be your instruction, and 5 bearing the signature of the late James Potter, which are the subject of a separate analysis. We are currently in the process of removing all illegal constructs from our client's person. We would advise you that the continued existence of this diagnostic record, and its implications, are known to the following parties: the Director of Gringotts Bank, the Senior Legal Counsel of Gringotts Bank, 7 senior assessors across 3 branches, and the Office of Magical Law at the Ministry of Magic, to which a sealed copy was delivered this morning. If you wish to discuss this matter further, you are welcome to attend a formal hearing, the date and location of which will be communicated to you through official channels. Yours in the tradition of Goblin law, Ragnarok, Director, Gringotts Bank. He sealed it, sent it, and then sat back and thought for a moment. Then he went to find Harry. Harry was in the small library adjacent to the residential quarters, which contained both gobbledygook texts and a selection of magical texts in English that Griphook had sourced from the bank's own collection. He was sitting cross-legged on the floor with a book about the history of magical contracts in his lap, not a children's book, a dense historical text, and he was reading it with the focused concentration of someone mining it for specific information. Ragnarok sat down on the bench beside him. "You're reading about contracts." "I'm reading about what makes a contract binding and what can break it," Harry said, not looking up. "Specifically magical contracts." He turned a page. "Did you know there are 37 documented ways to invalidate a magical oath? Most of them require one party to have entered the oath under duress or deception." "I am aware," Ragnarok said. Harry looked up. "The prophecy," he paused. "There's a prophecy about me, isn't there? That's part of why he did it." Ragnarok looked at him. "What makes you think that?" "Because the compulsions weren't random," Harry said. "They weren't just control. They were specific. They were shaping me toward specific behaviors. Specific outcomes. That implies he knows what outcomes he wants, and the only reason you'd know what outcomes you want from a 4-year-old is if something told you what role that 4-year-old is going to play." He put the book down. "And in the magical world, the thing that tells you that is a prophecy." Ragnarok looked at him for a long moment. Then he said, "You are 4 years old." "I know," Harry said. "You have been here 9 days." "I know. And you have deduced this from the structural analysis of enchantments you couldn't feel until last week." "The compulsions were very specific," Harry said again. "They told me what the story was supposed to be. I just read it backwards." He looked at Ragnarok. "Is there a prophecy?" "Yes," Ragnarok said. "Can you get a copy?" "In time," Ragnarok said. "For now, we focus on the removals. On making sure that whatever the prophecy says, you are the one who decides what to do about it, not the one who was already decided for. Harry nodded slowly. His eyes went back to the book. Ragnarok, he said. Yes. What was in your letter to Dumbledore? The one you sent this morning. I saw Griphook take it out. Ragnarok told him. Not all of it, the formal language he summarized, but the substance of it. Including the part about the ministry receiving a copy. Harry listened without interrupting. When Ragnarok finished, Harry said, he's going to be scared. Yes, Ragnarok said. Good, Harry said, and went back to reading. The power suppressors came off during the third week, in 3 sessions, and these were the ones that changed things visibly. The first session, when the outermost suppressor unraveled, the lights in the assessment room did what the lights in Petunia's kitchen had done, flickered, brightened, steadied. All the instruments on the walls registered a spike simultaneously and then recalibrated. The second session, the middle suppressor, sent a tremor through the floor of the room that the junior assessors felt in their feet and that cracked a hairline fracture across the stone table which was, Ragnarok noted, made of a stone that had not cracked in 800 years of continuous use. The third session, the innermost and largest suppressor, the one that had been placed when Harry was 15 months old and had been the foundation on which everything else was built, Ragnarok cleared the room first. Just himself and Harry and Griphook, who had worked with Ragnarok long enough to understand what was going to happen and had put on the armored gloves. This one, Ragnarok said, will be significant. Define significant, Harry said. We may lose some of the instruments on the walls. Harry looked at the instruments. Then he looked at Ragnarok. Are they expensive? Extraordinarily. But you're going to do it anyway. Yes, Ragnarok said. Because the alternative is leaving it in place, and that is not something I am willing to do. Harry nodded. He settled himself in the chair. He breathed in, breathed out, and said, ready. Ragnarok touched the anchor point. The room went white. Not from light, or not only from light. From something that was the magical equivalent of light, that registered in the instruments as a pulse so large it went off their scales, that registered in Ragnarok's hands as a force like standing in a river and feeling the current suddenly remember what it was. The instruments on the walls screamed in frequencies only goblins could hear. The stone chair, which had survived 800 years and every kind of magical stress Gringotts had ever subjected it to, developed 3 new cracks. Harry sat in the center of it with his eyes closed and his hands flat on the arms of the chair, and the force moved through him and out of him and the room adjusted itself around what he actually was, and when it was over he opened his eyes and the air in the room was different, charged, alive, aware in a way that it hadn't been before. He looked at his hands. The lights in the room were brighter than they had been, as though they'd been turned up, but no one had touched them. Harry, Ragnarok said. Harry turned his hands over, looking at them. Then he held one out toward the wall and thought about the candle in its bracket 12 feet away, and the candle bloomed from a small flame to a torch-bright blaze in a single breath. Harry put his hand down. Oh, he said. Yes, Ragnarok said. How much? Harry started. We don't know yet, Ragnarok said. And I want to be clear with you, raw power is not the point of this. It is not what makes you remarkable. It is not the thing that matters most. He waited until Harry was looking at him. What matters most is that it is yours. Every bit of it. No longer modified, constrained, shaped by someone else's design. Yours. Harry was quiet for a moment. The candle was still burning brightly. Then he looked at the crack in the stone table and said, "Sorry about the table." Griphook looked at the crack. "It's fine. You said it was 800 years old." "Everything needs redecorating eventually," Griphook said, and it was the closest Harry had ever heard him come to a joke, and Harry laughed, really laughed, the surprised, unguarded laugh of a child who has finally been allowed to be one, and the sound of it moved through the room and the instruments on the wall made sounds back, not distress sounds but something more like resonance, like they were answering. The memory blocks took 4 sessions and left Harry sitting very still for long periods after each one, not speaking, looking at things that weren't there. Ragnock stayed in the room every time without being asked, reading documents at the stone table or reviewing archive materials, simply present, available, not pressing. On the second session, what came back was the night of the accident. The green light. His mother's voice, high and clear, and then not there. The sense of falling and then nothing. Harry sat with that for a long time. Then he said, "She loved me." Very quietly. Not a question. Entirely, Ragnock said, without looking up from his documents. "And my dad?" Without reservation. Another silence. Then Harry said, "He blocked those memories." "Yes." "Why would he block?" Harry stopped. "Because if I knew, I'd have questions. I'd ask people about them. People who knew them. I'd know them as people and not as an abstract reason to do what he wanted." He paused. "He needed me not to know them so he could be the one who told me who they were." Ragnock set down his document. "Yes," he said. "That is precisely it. He was going to tell me they died as heroes," Harry said. "And that their sacrifice meant I had to do something. And I'd want to be worthy of them. He was going to use them as leverage." His voice was still quiet, still steady, but there was an edge under it now, not hot, not uncontrolled, but very sharp and very present. "Their deaths as leverage." "Yes. He doesn't get to do that," Harry said. "No," Ragnock agreed. "He does not." They sat together in the assessment room while the instruments ticked and Harry put his parents back into their proper place inside himself, not leverage, not mythology, not the sacred dead of a dead hero. Just Lily and James, who had loved him, who had been real people and not symbols, and who deserved to be known as themselves. It took a while. Ragnock waited. The soul leash came off on the last day of the second month. Ragnock had brought in 3 specialists from the Edinburgh branch. He had reviewed the removal protocol 17 times. He had slept 8 hours the night before, which was 4 more than usual, because he needed to be at his best for this. The soul leash ritual required fire, salt, a goblin-forged blade, and Harry's complete and sustained stillness for approximately 45 minutes while Ragnock worked at the anchor point on his left wrist, the terminus he'd felt from the first day, the heaviness, the pull toward something dark on the other end of the line. Harry was still for 45 minutes. Not rigid, not stiff, still in the way of deep water, with everything moving underneath in currents you couldn't see from the surface. Ragnock worked around his wrist and up his arm and through the deeper channels where the leash had rooted itself into his life force, and the 3 Edinburgh specialists monitored the diagnostic display and called out anchors as they located them, and Griphook stood at Harry's right side and said nothing but was there. When Ragnock cut the final anchor, Harry didn't gasp or cry or faint. He inhaled, slow and deep, and the air that came out of him when he exhaled was warm, and the candles in the room all brightened again, and he opened his eyes, and for the first time since they'd met him he looked light. Genuinely, physically lighter, as though something had been sitting on his chest every moment of his life and was now simply gone. "Is that all of them?" he said. "All 89, Ragnock confirmed." Harry looked down at his left wrist, which was smooth and unmarked. He turned it over. He flexed his fingers. "What happened to the line?" he said. "The thing on the other end of the leash. Does Dumbledore still, does he feel it?" "He felt it sever," Ragnock said. "He will have known the moment it broke. So he knows it's done." "Yes." "Good," Harry said. It came out very clean. Not angry, not triumphant, just clear, the way a statement of fact is clear when it describes something that is simply, irreversibly true. He got down from the chair, which he had not been able to do after most of the removal sessions, had needed to be helped, or had simply slept in it, and stood on the floor and breathed, and the instruments on the walls hummed at a frequency Ragnock had never heard them produce before. "What happens now?" Harry asked. Now, Ragnarok said, we show you what you actually are. Harry looked at him, and whatever he'd been at the beginning, the thin, watchful, barefoot boy with the stuffed owl and the made list and the question why circled 3 times, he was still that, all of it still there, but there was something else present now too. Something that had been in there the whole time, waiting behind 73 silver locks and 11 blue ones and 5 bruised red ones, patient as deep water, permanent as stone. Show me, Harry said. Chapter 3, The Godfathers. That the first time Harry made something happen on purpose, it was raining. He was in the training courtyard, a long, low-ceilinged space deep in the Gringotts complex that the goblins used for metallurgical testing, which meant the walls were scorched in places and the floor was a different kind of stone from the rest of the building, denser, less interested in cracking. Ragnarok had cleared it out and brought in 3 standing targets made from iron-dense wood and told Harry to stand at one end and see what happened. Harry had looked at the targets for a moment, then looked at his hands, then looked at Ragnarok. I don't know how to aim, he said. You don't need to yet, Ragnarok said. I want to see what you do without trying to aim. Don't think about form or intent or any specific result. Just want something to happen. What something? Anything, Ragnarok said. Within reason. Harry looked at the targets again. He thought, vaguely and without particular direction, move, and the nearest target slid 18 inches to the left as though pushed by a large, invisible hand, knocked into the middle one, and both of them fell over. The third one stayed standing. Harry frowned at it. It burst into flame. Said Harry. Yes, said Ragnarok. They spent 3 hours in the courtyard. No wand, Harry didn't have one yet, and Ragnarok had decided, watching the suppressors come off, that rushing Harry toward wand magic was like handing a river a pipe and insisting it flow through it. Better to understand what the river wanted to do first. The wandless work that emerged over those 3 hours was raw and uneven and almost entirely instinctive, which meant it was also very, very powerful in the specific way that unstructured magic tended not to be, not precise, not controlled, but enormous in a way that had the iron sconces on the walls vibrating. At the end of it Harry sat on the floor with his back against the wall, eating an apple grip Hook had brought, looking at the 3 targets, repaired twice over, now scorched and dented and somewhat resigned looking, with the thoughtful expression of someone taking inventory. It's like, he started, and then stopped. Take your time, Ragnarok said, sitting across from him. It's like I can see it, Harry said. Not with my eyes. Like, underneath everything. The magic in the walls, in the floor. The enchantments on the targets. Yours. He looked at Ragnarok. You have a lot of enchantments on you. I am old, Ragnarok said. Old things accumulate enchantments. There's one on your left hand. Old. Personal. Harry looked at it. Someone who loved you put that there. Ragnarok looked at his left hand for a moment. Then he looked at Harry. My wife, he said. She died 90 years ago. The enchantment remains. I'm sorry, Harry said. He said it simply, without the clumsy performance that adults usually attach to condolences, and went back to his apple. They sat in companionable quiet for a while, with the scorched targets and the vibrating sconces, and the rain that Harry couldn't see but could feel through 50 feet of rock above him, the water moving through the earth in its particular ancient way. Ragnarok, he said. Yes. The House of Black. The secondary inheritance line. He'd been reading more. Sirius Black is in Azkaban. For killing people. He paused. Did he? Ragnarok was quiet. I know you know, Harry said. You know everything that goes through Gringotts. I know what the records show, Ragnarok said carefully. The official records show that Sirius Black was arrested on the 1st of November, 1981, and imprisoned without trial. Harry stopped chewing his apple. Without a trial. Without a trial, Ragnarok confirmed. In the chaos following the end of the war, certain procedural requirements were expedited. He's been in Azkaban for 3 years, Harry said. Without a trial. Yes. For something he might not have done. Ragnock looked at him. For something the Gringotts records, which include the vault inheritance transfer documents, strongly suggest he did not do. Your father's will, which was sealed by Dumbledore before it could be properly executed, named Sirius Black as your primary guardian. A man who had committed murder would not be named a child's guardian by the man he supposedly served. Harry set the apple core down on the stone floor. He looked at the wall. The rain above him pressed through the earth with its quiet persistence. We need to get him out, Harry said. Yes, Ragnock said. We do. The legal apparatus of the wizarding world was, in Ragnock's estimation, a collection of poorly designed systems held together by inertia and the mutual agreement of those in power not to examine it too carefully. In Goblin estimation this was true of most human institutions, but the wizarding world had achieved a particular distinction in that it had managed to create a justice system that was simultaneously overcomplicated in its procedure and completely absent in its application. Getting Sirius Black a trial required 3 things, Ragnock explained to Harry the next morning over breakfast, actual breakfast, at an actual table, because Harry had started appearing in Ragnock's office at 7 in the morning every day and Ragnock had eventually accepted that feeding him and talking business simultaneously was more efficient than trying to separate the activities. First, Ragnock said, we need evidence that he was imprisoned without due process. We have that. The Wisengamot records show no trial date was ever set, no formal charges were read, and no verdict was delivered. The imprisonment was signed off by Bartemius Crouch Sr., who was head of magical law enforcement at the time and who appears to have had a personal investment in fast results that did not require the inconvenience of facts. Harry poured more pumpkin juice. He had decided, over the past weeks, that pumpkin juice was acceptable but not inspired. Second, we need someone to petition the Wisengamot on his behalf with standing sufficient to compel them to convene a hearing. You have that standing, as his named ward under your father's will, and as the holder of 4 noble house seats, you have more legal weight in the Wisengamot than most members. The petition in your name, filed through Gringotts as your legal representative, cannot be ignored. Third. Ragnock paused. Third, we need Dumbledore not to stop it. Harry ate his toast. He's the chief warlock of the Wisengamot. He runs the hearings. He was, Ragnock said. He resigned that position 6 days ago. Harry looked up. Why? Because 12 hours after we sent him our letter documenting the 89 enchantments, the Ministry of Magic received its sealed copy and the current minister, Millicent Bagnold, sent Dumbledore a formal request for explanation. He resigned from the Wisengamot before they could begin proceedings against him. Ragnock picked up his tea. Goblins drank tea in the morning, which Harry had found surprising and endearing, though he would never have said so. A man removing himself from a position of oversight before an investigation begins is either very guilty or very strategic. In Dumbledore's case, I suspect he is both. So who runs the Wisengamot hearings now? Interim Chief Warlock Tiberius Ogden. Who is old, moderately principled, and deeply uncomfortable with the entire situation, which makes him useful. Ragnock set down his tea. He will not obstruct a legitimate legal petition from a noble house. He is too worried about how it will look. Harry considered this. Can I come to the hearing? No, Ragnock said. I'm the petitioner. You are 4 years old. 4.5, Harry said. The distinction does not significantly alter the legal and practical problems with presenting a 4.5-year-old child to the Wisengamot as the primary moving force in a political and legal action that is already attracting considerable attention, Ragnock said. Your role is to sign the petition. My role is to be present. Your role, he looked at Harry, is to trust that I know how to navigate a room full of politicians better than you currently do. Harry looked at him. Currently. You will learn, Ragnock said. For now, Sit here and read the procedure documents I'm going to give you, because you should understand every step of what we're doing. The petition was filed on a Thursday. By Friday it was front-page news. Petunia called on Friday afternoon. She'd been calling every week, and Harry had been speaking with her through a communication mirror Gringotts used for client contact, which she operated with the specific tension of someone handling a piece of equipment they find philosophically objectionable. She looked the same as always, neat, wary, permanently braced. "You're in the Prophet," she said. "I know," Harry said. "It says," she glanced down, apparently at the paper. "The boy who lived, represented by Gringotts Bank, files petition for review of Sirius Black imprisonment. With a picture of," "There's no picture of you, just the Gringotts logo, but," she looked up. "Harry. Are you, this is a very large thing to be doing." "Yes," Harry said. "You're 4. 4.5, he said, which he'd apparently decided was worth specifying to everyone. "Does it?" She stopped. "Sirius Black is your godfather." "Yes. He was supposed to, James and Lily named him." She stopped again, and her face did the thing it sometimes did, the thing Harry had noticed, where she was thinking about something that she was also actively trying not to think about. "He was at the funeral," she said. "I didn't go. But there was a note, from Dumbledore, when he left you on my doorstep. It said your godfather was unavailable." "He was in Azkaban without a trial," Harry said. "For something he probably didn't do." Petunia was quiet for a moment. "How do you know that?" "Gringotts records. And common sense. Dad named him my guardian in the will. Dad wasn't stupid." Another silence. Then Petunia said, "No. He wasn't." She said it in the careful way she said anything about Lily and James, like she was picking up something fragile and setting it back down quickly. "He was, James Potter was." She stopped. "Your father was not stupid. Whatever else he was." "What was he?" Harry asked. Petunia looked at him through the mirror. "Loud," she said, finally. "Confident. He loved your mother in a way that was," she seemed surprised by her own words, examining them as they came out. "Embarrassingly obvious. He made her laugh. I hated that." She paused. "I was jealous of it." "Of Mum?" "Of the laughing," she said. And then, more quietly, "of all of it." They looked at each other through the mirror for a moment, the woman who had raised him out of obligation and the boy who had grown up knowing the obligation was not the same as love, and something passed between them that was not exactly warmth but was more honest than anything they'd managed before. "The hearing is in 2 weeks, Harry said. Ragnarok thinks it will go well. And if it does? If they let Black out, he becomes my guardian," Harry said. "Legally." Petunia nodded slowly. "And you'd live with him?" "Yes." She nodded again. "Good," she said, and her voice was very even. "That's, yes. Good." She looked at the paper again, at the Gringotts logo, at the headline. "You look after yourself. Down there. In the bank." "I am," Harry said. "Eat properly." "I do. The food is excellent." "Don't be smart," she said, which was such a reflex that it made Harry smile slightly, and he saw the corner of her mouth move in response before she schooled it. "I'll let you know how the hearing goes," he said. She disconnected the mirror. The hearing was on a Thursday, which Ragnarok claimed was the best day for Wisengamot hearings because by Thursday most of the members had already committed to their positions and were easier to predict. Harry read the transcript of the session in real time. Griphook had set up a system by which the official court reporter's magical transcription appeared simultaneously on a parchment in Harry's room, and he sat cross-legged on his bed with the stuffed owl wedged behind him and read every word. It lasted 4 hours. The ministry's representative, a man named Crouch, who turned out to be the son of the Bartemius Crouch who had imprisoned Sirius without trial, spent the first 40 minutes arguing that the imprisonment was procedurally sound. Ragnarok spent the next 20 minutes disassembling that argument with the methodical pleasure of someone who had been looking forward to this specific conversation for quite some time. He entered into evidence the absence of trial records, the absence of formal charges, the vault inheritance documents showing James Potter's explicit legal intention, and a statement from 3 independent magical historians regarding the standard procedure for criminal imprisonment in 1981 and the degree to which none of it had been followed in Sirius Black's case. The Waisengemot voted at hour 3. 26-11 in favor of convening a formal review. Harry read 26-11 and put the parchment down and sat very still for a moment. Not celebrating, not performing relief. Just registering it. The way a compass needle registers north, without drama, without fanfare, just the quiet confirmation of a direction. Then he picked the parchment back up and kept reading. Sirius Black was brought before the Waisengemot 11 days later. Harry wasn't there for this either, but he read this transcript too, and Ragnarok described what he'd seen when he came back, which was more useful, because transcripts don't capture the quality of silence in a room when a man walks in who hasn't seen sunlight in 3 years. He came in under guard, Ragnarok said. He paused, selecting the word with care. Diminished. Physically. Azkaban does that. But he walked in under his own power and he looked at the room the way you look at rooms. He waited for Harry to understand the reference. Harry understood it. The watching. The attention. Making sure nothing surprises you. He's like me, Harry said. He has survived by being very much like you, Ragnarok agreed. The Dementors at Azkaban feed on happiness, on positive memory. He was unable to maintain human form. Harry looked up. He is an animagus. He can transform into a large black dog. In that form the Dementors could not reach him as effectively. He spent a great deal of his imprisonment as a dog. Harry was quiet. He thought about Sirius Black in a cold cell, spending years as a dog because it was the only way to keep enough of himself intact to survive. He thought about what that required, the specific, stripped-down quality of will that allowed you to decide, every single day, to still be here. What happened at the hearing, he said. The testimony of 3 witnesses established that Peter Pettigrew, the man Sirius was accused of killing, along with 12 muggles, faked his own death. There is evidence, which the original investigation chose not to examine, that Pettigrew was the actual traitor who gave your parents' location to Voldemort. Sirius was the suspected secret keeper for the Potters. He was not, in fact, the secret keeper. Pettigrew was. The room was quiet. Dumbledore knew, Harry said. It wasn't a question. Ragnarok was quiet for a moment. The evidence suggests he knew enough to have investigated and chose not to. Because an innocent Sirius Black would have been my guardian, Harry said. And Dumbledore needed me at Privet Drive. Under blood protections. Away from anyone who'd have taken proper care of me. His voice was even. Factual. The edge under it was very thin and very bright. An innocent Sirius Black was inconvenient. Yes, Ragnarok said. Harry nodded once. Set it in the file he was building, the one titled Why, which was filling up with answers that were simultaneously very logical and very monstrous. Was he cleared? Fully. The vote was 31-6. He is being processed out of Azkaban today. He will need medical attention, there is a healer present, goblin trained, and he will need several days before he is, Ragnarok paused. Before he is himself enough to meet you. When? I said he needs several days, when? Harry said, and his voice was still even, still measured, but there was something underneath it that was not a child asking about a schedule. Something that had been waiting a long time for the answer to a question it hadn't known how to ask. Ragnarok looked at him. 3 days, he said. I will bring him here. You will meet in, somewhere comfortable. Not the assessment room. Not the assessment room, Harry agreed. Sirius Black came to Gringotts 3 days later, and he arrived looking like a man who had decided, somewhere during the journey from the ministry to this underground hallway, that whatever he felt about everything could wait until he'd seen the child. He was tall, Harry had expected tall, somehow, with dark hair that should have been at shoulder length but had been cut by the healers and was now unevenly short. He was thin in the way of someone who had been much thinner recently and was in the process of recovering. His eyes were grey and clear and went immediately to Harry the moment he came into the room, and he stopped walking. Harry was standing in the middle of the room Ragnarok had chosen, a sitting room in the residential quarters, with actual comfortable furniture, which the goblins owned but used rarely. He was wearing a green jumper that was slightly too big for him, and he had the owl tucked under his left arm because he'd been carrying it when Griphook came to get him and hadn't thought to put it down. They looked at each other. "Hi," Harry said. Sirius Black made a sound that was probably supposed to be a response but came out as something more involuntary than that. He crossed the room in 3 steps and dropped to his knees on the floor so he was at Harry's height, and he looked at him, at his face, at his eyes, at the dark hair that didn't lie flat, with an expression that was almost painful to witness, the expression of someone seeing a ghost and a miracle simultaneously. "Prongs," he said, very quietly. Not to Harry. To whoever he was seeing in Harry's face. "That's my dad's nickname," Harry said. "Yeah," Sirius said. His voice was rough. "You look," he stopped. His hands came up and then stopped themselves, hovering, not quite touching Harry's face, clearly not sure if they had the right. "You look exactly like him. Except the eyes." "Mum's eyes," Harry said. "Lily's eyes," Sirius agreed. "Lily's exact eyes." He lowered his hands. Swallowed. "I'm sorry. I'm supposed to be the adult here." "You don't have to be," Harry said. "Not right now." Sirius looked at him. Then he laughed, a short, broken, genuine laugh, and sat down on the floor properly, legs crossed, back against the chair behind him, so he and Harry were at the same level, and Harry sat down across from him without being asked. "They told me," Sirius said. "Ragnarok told me. About the spells. What Dumbledore did." 89, Harry said. "Harry," he stopped. "God, I've been saying your name in my head for 3 years. Harry. It's strange to say it out loud." He pressed his hand over his eyes briefly. "I should have been there. I should have, the night your parents, I went after Peter, and I left you there. I knew Hagrid was coming for you but I left you and I should have." "You didn't know about Dumbledore," Harry said. "Still. You were trying to find the man who killed my parents," Harry said. "That's not," he looked at Sirius carefully. "That's not something you should be sorry for. I should have come back for you first." "Maybe," Harry said. "But you didn't, and that was 3 years ago, and I'm here and so are you, so." He paused. "I think we're past the point where regret is the most useful thing." Sirius looked at him for a long moment. "How old are you?" he said. 4.5. "Right." He ran his hand through his uneven hair. "Right, 4.5. Okay. You're 4.5 and you sound like," he stopped and laughed again, this time with more actual humor in it. "You sound like Lily." When Lily was being logical at James and James just had to sit there and take it because she was right. Was she right a lot? "About everything that mattered," Sirius said. His voice was softer. "She was always right about the things that mattered." He looked at Harry's eyes, the particular green, the specific shape of them, and the grief in his face was clean and old and not going anywhere. "She would be so," he stopped. "She would be so proud of you. What you've done here, getting me out, she'd be." "Ragnarok did most of it," Harry said. "You signed the petition." I signed a piece of paper. Don't do that, Sirius said. Don't minimize it. Your mother never minimized things she'd done and neither should you. He looked at him steadily. You are the reason I'm sitting here. On this floor. In this room. Breathing air that doesn't taste like Dementors. His voice cracked very slightly on the last word. That was you. Harry looked at him. The stuffed owl was still under his arm. He looked at it and then, very deliberately, held it out to Sirius. Sirius looked at the owl. Is this? It was Mum's, Harry said. When she was small. I sleep with it. I don't know why he paused. You should hold it. For a minute. If you want. Sirius Black took the owl with both hands with the careful reverence of someone receiving something irreplaceable, and he held it and looked at it and didn't say anything, and Harry watched him and let the quiet be what it needed to be. Petunia came in person, 2 days later. She had not been to Gringotts since the first day, communicating exclusively through the mirror, and her arrival in the residential quarters was announced by the particular sound of her heels on the stone corridor and her general atmospheric presence, which was like a very well-organized cold front. Harry met her in the sitting room. Sirius was also there, because Ragnarok had thought it best to get the guardianship paperwork done while everyone was in the same location, and Petunia took one look at Sirius, sitting on the couch in borrowed clothes, looking significantly better than he had 3 days ago but still carrying the specific worn quality of someone who'd spent years in Azkaban, and said nothing. She sat in the chair across from him and looked at him. You're the godfather, she said. Yeah, Sirius said. You knew Lily. Since we were 11. Petunia looked at her hands. Then back at him. Was she happy? Before, was she happy? Sirius looked at her. The question clearly surprised him. This was not what he'd been expecting from Petunia Desley. Yes, he said. She was happy. She and James were, they were brilliant together. And Harry was, he glanced at Harry. She was so happy about Harry. She used to talk to him before he was born. Just, tell him things. About the house, about the garden, about the spells she was working on. Like he was already there. Petunia was very still. She talked to him. All the time. Silence. Then Petunia said, she used to do that to plants. Talk to them. When we were girls. She said they grew better. A pause. They did, actually. Something moved between the two adults that Harry observed without fully understanding, some piece of grief being exchanged, lily-shaped, that neither of them had been able to carry alone. He watched it happen and understood that there were things between adults about people they'd lost that children were peripheral to, and he let it be peripheral. The guardianship paperwork was brought out by Griphook after 20 minutes. 3 forms, Petunia relinquishing the legal guardianship that had never been formally established in the wizarding world to begin with, Sirius formally taking it, and Harry's Gringotts certified agreement, which Ragnarok had insisted on because Harry, regardless of age, was a client with standing. Petunia signed her form with her usual precise signature, the ink drying in the crisp air of the residential quarters. Sirius signed his with a hand that was not quite steady and a jaw that was very set. Harry signed his with a small, clear H.J. Potter that Ragnarok watched with quiet approval. That's it? Sirius said. In the legal sense, Ragnarok said. There are registration requirements with the Ministry and a filing with the Wisengamot, both of which I will handle. For practical purposes, he looked at Sirius. You are his guardian. Sirius looked at Harry. Harry looked at Sirius. I should tell you, Harry said, that I'm not actually a typical 4-year-old. I had noticed, Sirius said. Ragnarok is teaching me some things. Good. I have questions. A lot of them. About my parents, about the war, I'll answer all of them, Sirius said. Every single one. For as long as you want to ask. He paused. I might need to stop sometimes because some of them will be hard. But I'll always come back to them. Harry nodded. That's fair. And I'm going to need to do better at this than I'm currently equipped to do, Sirius said, and there was a raw honesty in it that had nothing to do with performance. I spent 3 years in Azkaban. I'm working on being a functional person again. I want to be good at this, being your family. But I need you to know I'm starting from not great. I know, Harry said. I'm starting from not great too. He considered. We can figure it out. Sirius looked at him, and the thing that moved through his face was complicated and genuine and very much the face of someone who had been given, unexpectedly, something to live toward. Yeah, he said. We can. Petunia stood up, straightened her coat, picked up her bag. She looked at Harry for a moment, that specific look she had, the one she probably didn't know was as complicated as it was. Make sure he eats, she said to Sirius. He seems to manage fine on his own, Sirius said. He doesn't ask for things, she said, which was still the most insightful observation anyone had made about Harry's habits. You have to notice. Sirius looked at Harry, who was not confirming or denying this. I'll notice, he said. Petunia nodded once. She looked at Harry for another moment. Good, she said, which was not what she meant but was what she could manage, and Harry had always understood the difference, and he nodded back. She left. The week after the guardianship was formalized, the Wizengamot made a formal request for Dumbledore's appearance before a review board. The terms of the request, delivered by Ministry Owl to Hogwarts, were polite, official, and absolutely non-optional. Dumbledore's response arrived at Gringotts 2 days later, addressed to Ragnarok. Harry read it over Ragnarok's shoulder, which Ragnarok had stopped objecting to at some point over the past 2 months. Director Ragnarok, I understand that Harry is in your care and that steps have been taken toward his liberation, as you no doubt frame it. I want you to know, and I ask that you communicate this to Harry directly, that everything I did was done in service of a greater good that I hope you will one day understand. I made choices that caused harm. I am not unaware of that. But there is a darkness in this world, a darkness that was not defeated in 1981, only delayed, and the path to defeating it completely requires Harry's willingness to walk it. I have spent a great deal of time and effort trying to ensure he would be willing. I see now that the method was wrong. But the necessity was not. I am not your enemy. I am not Harry's enemy. I would ask for the chance to explain. Yours, Albus Dumbledore. Harry finished reading it. He stepped back from Ragnarok's desk and stood with his hands in the pockets of his jeans. Sirius had taken him shopping in the Muggle world 2 days ago, which had been an adventure for both of them, and looked at the letter. He thinks he can still talk me into it, Harry said. That's what this is. He's framing himself as the reasonable one who made mistakes but meant well, because that's the version of himself that's hardest to argue with. Yes, Ragnarok said. He's very good at it. He has been doing it for approximately a century, Ragnarok said. He is, yes, exceptional at it. The thing is, Harry said slowly, some of it is probably even true. The darkness isn't defeated. There is something coming. I can feel it, I could feel it even before the soul leash came off, and now, he paused. There's still something in my scar. Something that doesn't belong to me. We never, I know, Ragnarok said. He'd been watching Harry's scar since the soul leash removal. It is not Dumbledore's work. It is older. Darker. It's part of Voldemort, Harry said. Ragnarok was quiet. It's been there since the night my parents died, Harry said. It's why the killing curse didn't kill me. Something of him, transferred. Attached. He touched his scar absently. I can hear it sometimes. Not words. Just, a frequency. Something cold. We need to address it, Ragnarok said. Yes, Harry said. But not yet. Right now, he looked at Dumbledore's letter. Write back. Tell him Harry Potter has read his letter and notes that the method being wrong and the necessity not being wrong are not actually different things when the method is casting 73 illegal enchantments on a 15-month-old child. Tell him that if he has information about the darkness, actual information, not justifications, he can submit it to Gringotts in writing and it will be reviewed. Tell him that Harry Potter does not require his guidance, his plan, or his management. And tell him that if he attempts to make contact directly, through any means, we will file the complete diagnostic record with the International Confederation of Wizards by end of business. Ragnarok looked at him. A 4.5-year-old in genes too new to be broken in yet, dictating diplomatic correspondence to the director of Gringotts Bank about the most powerful wizard in Britain. Anything else? Ragnarok said. Tell him the review board hearing is not optional, Harry said. He needs to go. He needs to be accountable. That part isn't about me anymore, it's about the next child he decides to do this to. Ragnarok began writing. The Wisengamot's formal censure of Dumbledore was delivered 6 weeks later. He was not stripped of his positions, the evidence, while damning, existed in the complicated space between goblin law and wizarding law, and the Wisengamot was not prepared to fully prosecute the man who defeated Grindelwald regardless of the circumstances. But the censure was public record. The restrictions placed on his ability to act as legal guardian or magical overseer of any minor child were binding and monitored. His standing in the international community took a blow that was quiet but permanent, the kind of damage that didn't show in press conferences but showed in rooms, in the way people received him, in the slight recalibration of deference that had been automatic before. Harry read the censure document and set it on his desk. Sirius read it in the armchair across from him. He'd taken to spending evenings in Harry's room, or Harry in his, the two of them reading in parallel, which had apparently been something Sirius and James had also done, though he'd mentioned this only once and with the careful brevity of someone touching something hot. It's not enough, Sirius said. No, Harry said. But it's what was available right now. It's also one piece of a larger thing. He looked at Sirius. He'll be back. Not for me directly, he'll be too careful for that. But he hasn't stopped believing he's right. People like that don't. People like that, Sirius repeated. You're 5. 4 3/4, Harry corrected. Christ. Sirius dropped his head back against the chair. You know what James was like at 4 3/4? He was trying to eat his own shoe. Did he succeed? Partially. Sirius looked at the ceiling. God, I miss him. He said it very simply, without performance, the way Harry said things he meant. I'm going to miss him every day until I die, and it's just what it is. Tell me about him, Harry said. Sirius brought his head up. Looked at Harry. Looked at the ceiling again. And then he talked, about James, about Lily, about Hogwarts and the Marauders, and a friendship that had been the kind of friendship you build when you're 11 and still think it will last forever, which in James's case it had, because he had died still certain of it. He talked for 2 hours, and Harry listened to every word, and outside the constructed window the firelit hills moved in their artificial wind, and somewhere in the rock above them London went on with its indifferent Tuesday evening, and a boy who was supposed to be a weapon sat in a goblin bank and learned, for the first time, what it felt like to have family that was real. The Wisengamot document sat on the desk. The file labeled Y was full of answers. And 3 floors below, in the vault that had been flagged the moment Harry came within range of it, the Potter family fortune waited in the dark alongside the sealed will that James Potter had written when he was 21 years old, naming his best friend as guardian of his son, because he had trusted, completely and correctly, that the person who loved Harry enough to chase a traitor to the ends of the earth was exactly the right person to raise him. He'd just been right 3 years too late. They were making up the time. Chapter 4, The Girl with the Book. The bookshop was called Flourishes, and it was not Flourish and Blots. Flourish and Blots was the famous one, the one everyone went to, which was precisely why Ragnarok had directed Harry to this one instead. Flourishes occupied a narrow building 3 doors down from a cauldron shop in a part of Diagon Alley that the tourist traffic hadn't fully discovered, and it was run by a goblin-human partnership that made it the only magical archive library in Britain with a full cross-reference system between human magical texts and goblin historical records. It smelled like old paper and copper and something faintly electrical, which Harry had eventually identified as the ambient magic of several hundred enchanted texts all doing their slow, continuous work on the same shelves. Harry was 8 now. For years inside Gringotts and then, gradually, carefully, with Sirius and Ragnarok both hovering in their different ways, outside it. A flat in Muggle London where Sirius was learning to be a person again, which he was doing with the specific chaotic energy of someone who had missed 4 years of life and was trying to catch up on all of it simultaneously. Books from everywhere. A tutor named Mirabelle who came 3 times a week and was a retired unspeakable who had once had an argument with Dumbledore that she described only as irreconcilable differences about the nature of human dignity, which had made Harry like her immediately. Ragnarok's ongoing program of magical education, which did not use a curriculum so much as it used Harry's own curiosity as the syllabus, following whatever he was currently obsessed with and making sure he had the materials and the space to pursue it completely. What Harry was currently obsessed with was the intersection of goblin ward theory and ancient rune systems, which was why he was in Flourishes on a Thursday afternoon in July with 3 books already under his arm and was currently searching the eastern shelves for a 4th that Ragnarok had referenced in passing 2 days ago and that Harry had not been able to stop thinking about since. He found it on the top shelf. It was also being reached for, at the same moment, by someone on a step stool. Harry looked up. On the step stool was a girl approximately his age, brown, bushy hair, the specific expression of someone who had already planned exactly where this book fit into their current reading sequence and would be quite put out if it was unavailable. She had 3 books under her own arm and was stretching for the 4th with the determined reach of someone who was going to get what she came for. Her fingers closed on the spine at the same moment Harry's did. They both held on. She looked down at him. He looked up at her. "I need that book," she said. Firm. Polite. Non-negotiable. "So do I," Harry said, in the same register. "I've been looking for it for 2 weeks," she said. "I had to cross-reference 3 separate catalogs to find out this shop had a copy." "I found out about it on Tuesday," Harry said, "which is less time, but I came here specifically for it, so I think the intent is equal." She blinked. This was apparently not the response she'd been expecting. "It's about goblin rune systems," she said, as though clarifying the book's contents might change his position. "I know," he said. "The 3rd chapter covers the relationship between Futhark derivations and the Gringotts ward matrices, which I need because I'm trying to understand why the standard human approach to layered wards loses coherence above 7 layers while goblin wards routinely operate at 40 or 50. She stared at him. "That's exactly why I need it," she said. They looked at each other. "Are you actually here alone?" she said. "You're 8. My guardian is in the section on theoretical transfiguration," Harry said. "Are you here alone?" "My parents are outside," she said. "They don't, they're Muggle. They find the shop a bit much." "Do you come here often?" "Every 3rd Thursday," she said, as though this were the most natural schedule in the world. "They walk down to the cafe on the corner and I have 45 minutes. "That's very organized," Harry said. "I'm a very organized person," she said. It wasn't arrogance. It was the same register as everything else she'd said, factual, precise, offered as relevant information. She looked at the book. "You could go first," she said, with the tone of someone making a significant concession. "And I could come back next Thursday. Or," Harry said, "we could both sit down and read it. It's not a long text. We could probably get through the relevant sections in 45 minutes if we're efficient about it." She looked at him for a moment with the assessing quality of someone running a rapid cost-benefit analysis. Then she climbed down from the step stool, and Harry took the book, and they found a reading table near the east window where the afternoon light came in at the right angle, and they sat down across from each other and opened it between them on the table. It worked very well. She read quickly and didn't need to reread things, which matched Harry's pace. When she hit something she disagreed with, she made a very small sound at the back of her throat that Harry found he could interpret accurately by the second time he heard it. When he pointed to a passage that connected to something he'd been thinking about, she looked at it and said, "Yes, but," and then told him why the connection was more complicated than it appeared, and she was right, and he told her so, and she looked slightly surprised that he had. "Most people don't just agree when I correct them," she said. "Most people are wrong to disagree," Harry said. "You were right." She looked at him again with the assessing expression. "I'm Hermione Granger," she said. "Harry Potter," he said. The expression shifted. He watched her process the name, saw the moment of recognition, the slight widening of the eyes, and watched her, with an almost physical effort of will, refocus past it. She started. "Yes," he said. "Can we keep reading? We only have about 20 minutes left." She looked at the book. Back at him. Made a decision. "Yes," she said. Page 37, the bit about anchor interference. "I already have a theory about that," Harry said. "Tell me," she said, and leaned forward with her elbows on the table, and they talked about anchor interference in goblin rune matrices for the next 20 minutes with the focused intensity of two people who have just discovered that another person exists who can keep up with them. She came back the next Thursday. Harry was already there when she arrived, which she noted without comment and which he noticed her noting. She had a new book under her arm, something on the history of magical education systems in continental Europe, and she sat down across from him with the ease of someone who had already decided this arrangement was workable. "I looked up the Potter family," she said, without preamble. "In the books I have at home." "What did you find?" he said. "That you're supposed to be at school with Dumbledore's guidance and that there was a lot of confusion in the Prophet about where you were for several years." She looked at him steadily. "The Prophet makes it sound like Gringotts kidnapped you." "The Prophet makes things sound like whatever Dumbledore wants things to sound like," Harry said. "He doesn't have quite as much influence over the editorial line as he used to, but it's still substantial." "That's a serious accusation against a newspaper," she said. "You looked up the Prophet's ownership structure," he said. A pause. "I hadn't done that yet. It's indirectly funded through 3 charitable foundations, 2 of which have committee seats held by Hogwarts governors, who are appointed partly through Dumbledore's recommendation," Harry said. "Not direct control. Significant structural influence." He paused. "It's worth being specific about the difference." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "How did you find that out?" "Ragnarok," Harry said. "Director of Gringotts. He teaches me things about how power actually works versus how it presents itself." "That's not a normal education," she said. "No," he agreed. "My school, I go to a Muggle school, and I read ahead in everything, and I know I'm going to Hogwarts when I'm 11 because I got a letter already, preliminary notification." She stopped. "My education is very normal and I find it quite limiting." "What do you want to know that you can't find out?" Harry asked. She looked at him. It was clearly not a question she'd been asked before. She opened her mouth, closed it, thought properly. "The history of magical theory before the standardization of wand use," she said. "All the books assume wands as the default and everything before it is treated as primitive or irrelevant, but that can't be right because the things that were built before wands, Stonehenge, the Goblin Vaults, the Founder's enchantments on Hogwarts, are still standing, which means they were better built than most things that came after." Harry looked at her. "I've been thinking about exactly that for 2 years," he said. She looked back at him. "Have you found anything?" "Yes," he said. "Quite a lot, actually." "Do you have a longer than 45 minutes?" She turned and looked out the window toward the cafe on the corner. Turned back. "Give me a moment." She went to the door of the shop, leaned out, and spoke to someone Harry couldn't see. She came back. My parents say an hour is fine if I check in. They talked for an hour and 20 minutes, and when Hermione's parents came to find her they discovered their daughter sitting across from a boy with messy hair and a concentration of old books between them, both of them talking at a pace that suggested they had found something they'd been looking for. Her mother, a tall woman with the same quality of practical attention as Hermione, looked at Harry and said, "And you are?" "Harry Potter," he said, standing up. She looked at him. "Ah," she said, in the tone of someone placing a name. "Hermione's mentioned the article in, Mum," Hermione said. "I was just going to say, I know what you were going to say," Hermione said, with the slightly pained patience of someone who loves their parents and also finds them occasionally embarrassing. "It's fine," Harry said. "My name causes a reaction. I'm used to it." Hermione's mother looked at him for a moment longer with an expression that Harry recognized. It was the expression adults got when they were recalibrating their expectations of a child. "Will you be here next Thursday?" she said. "I'm usually here on Thursdays," Harry said. "Good," she said, in the decisive way of someone who has made a decision and is not planning to revisit it. "Hermione, say goodbye." "Goodbye," Hermione said. Then, to Harry, with the directness that was apparently just her natural register, "The section on pre-wand ward construction in the Goblin Archive, can you get access?" "I think if we cross-reference it with the Founding-era documents, I'll get access," Harry said. "Next Thursday." She nodded with the satisfaction of someone ticking an item off a list, and followed her mother out. Harry sat back down and looked at the books on the table and thought about the specific quality of the past hour and a half, the pace of it, the back and forth that hadn't required him to slow down or simplify, the experience of saying something half-formed and having someone catch it and hand it back completed, and felt something he didn't have an immediate word for. He decided it was probably what people meant when they said they'd made a friend. Sirius found the whole thing quietly delightful. He'd come into the shop as their first Thursday meeting was winding up and had sat in the corner with a copy of Transfiguration Today pretending not to listen, and when Harry came to find him he'd put the magazine down with the expression of someone who has been given something valuable. "That girl," he said. "Hermione Granger," Harry said. "She argued with you about the Futhark derivations." "She was partly right." "You told her she was partly right." "She was," Harry said. "James never told anyone they were right unless he'd been proven wrong 3 separate times, and even then he'd frame it as a joint discovery," Sirius said, with the fond exasperation of someone who has spent a great deal of time being disagreed with by Potters. "You're going to be much easier to be around than your father was." "High bar," Harry said. "Medium bar," Sirius said. "Honestly, James was," he stopped, and the lightness in his face shifted slightly, the way it always did when something James-adjacent snuck up on him. "He was great. He was just also exhausting. High confidence, slightly wrong 40% of the time." "What percentage were you?" "Oh, I was wrong at least 60% of the time, but I was a lot more charming about it," Sirius said, and Harry laughed, and Sirius looked at the laugh with the expression he always got when Harry laughed properly, the expression of someone watching something good happen and wanting to commit it to memory. They walked back through Diagon Alley together, Harry with his stack of books and Sirius with his hands in his pockets, and the afternoon was warm and the alley was busy and people looked at Harry sometimes. The scar was visible, the name was known, the newspapers had been running whatever happened to the boy who lived pieces every few months for the past 4 years, but the looking didn't bother Harry. He looked back, steadily and without performing anything, and people generally found something else to look at. "Sirius," Harry said. "Yeah. What do you know about soul fragments?" Sirius stopped walking. Harry kept walking for 2 more steps and then stopped and turned. Sirius had his hands out of his pockets now. His expression was the one he wore when something had hit a nerve he hadn't been expecting to have hit. "What kind of question is that?" Sirius said. "An honest one," Harry said. "I know what's in my scar. Ragnarok and I have been discussing it for a while. I want to understand it better before we address it, and I want input from someone who knew things about the war that aren't in the archive records." "You're 8, Sirius said. "You keep saying that like it changes the content of the question." "Harry, I can feel it," Harry said. Not loudly. Not with drama. Just the flat statement of a fact he was accustomed to living with. "It's cold. It's always there. It thinks things, not words, not really, but something like the shape of words, the shape of intentions. And when he paused, choosing carefully. "When I'm particularly tired, or when something hits my scar, it gets louder." Sirius closed his eyes briefly. "Opened them." "Yeah," he said. "Okay. Not here. Let's go home." The conversation at home lasted 3 hours and covered Horcruxes, the war, what Sirius knew about the night of the attack, what he'd pieced together in Azkaban with nothing but time and knowledge, and the specific cold clarity of Voldemort's presence that Sirius described as something he'd felt once, when he was 19 and had been in the same room as the man and had understood immediately and instinctively that this was something that had stopped being purely human some time ago. "He made multiple," Harry said. It wasn't a question. He'd been working through goblin records on dark magic artifacts for the past year and the patterns had been accumulating. "We thought so." "The Order." Before, Sirius's jaw tightened briefly. Dumbledore definitely knew. He always knew more than he said. He looked at Harry. "If there's a piece of Voldemort in your scar, it got there because the killing curse rebounded and fragments of his soul, already destabilized by the other Horcruxes he'd made, were scattered. Some went to objects. One went to you." "Accidentally," Harry said. "Accidentally," Sirius agreed. "You weren't supposed to be a Horcrux. You were supposed to be dead." Harry sat with this for a moment. "Dumbledore knows it's there." "Almost certainly. And he didn't remove it." Sirius stopped. Started again. "I think, based on what Ragnarok found, what the compulsions were designed to do, I think he needed it to stay there." "Because it's the last one," Harry said. "If it's the last Horcrux and Voldemort comes back, which he will, the soul fragment in my scar feels like something waiting, not something finished. Dumbledore needed me to be the thing that ended it. He needed me to walk in and let Voldemort kill me so the Horcrux would be destroyed, and he was building me to be willing to do that." The flat was quiet. Outside, a London bus went past with its particular low rumble. "He was going to send you to die," Sirius said. His voice was very controlled. "He thought it was necessary," Harry said. "That doesn't, I know," Harry said. "It doesn't make it right." "I know that." He looked at the window. At the London street beyond it, ordinary and unenchanted, bus stops and chip shops and a woman walking a dog. "But it means there's a real problem that still exists regardless of what Dumbledore did or didn't do. There's a soul fragment of the most dangerous dark wizard of the century living in my head. And it needs to come out. Ragnarok can do it. Ragnarok thinks he can. He's been researching the ritual for 2 years. He won't say he's certain, goblins never say they're certain about things they're not certain about, but he says the probability is favorable." Harry paused. "Not yet though. We need more preparation. And there are other Horcruxes that need to be accounted for first. If we destroy the fragment in my scar while others still exist, Voldemort is still immortal." "You're planning to hunt them," Sirius said. "I'm planning to be prepared when the time comes," Harry said carefully. "There's a difference." Sirius looked at him. His godson, 8 years old, dark hair, lily's eyes, sitting on the couch with a cup of tea he'd made himself because he'd started making his own tea at 6 and no one had thought to stop him, looked back at him with that steady, ancient quality that had nothing to do with age and everything to do with what the past 4 years had made of him. "I want to help," Sirius said. "I know," Harry said. "You will." He told Hermione about the Horcrux on the 5th Thursday. "Not immediately. It was preceded by an hour of actual work. She'd brought access to the founding-era documents that she'd managed to locate through the Muggle British Library's archive of pre-1700 manuscripts, which was a remarkable piece of research that Harry told her was remarkable, and she accepted with the brisk acknowledgement of someone who doesn't need praise but appreciates accuracy. Then the work was done and the books were stacked and neither of them moved to leave, which had become a habit, the unwillingness to end the Thursday session the moment the stated purpose was complete. "Can I tell you something?" Harry said. She looked at him. "Yes. It's a large thing. A serious thing. And you don't have to." He stopped, because he was doing the thing he'd noticed he did sometimes, preparing an exit for the other person, making it easy for them to not be involved, which was a habit left over from before the removals that he was still in the process of recognizing and discarding. "I'm going to tell you something. And you can do whatever you want with it." She waited. He told her about the Horcrux. Not everything, not the soul leash, not the full history, those were things he was still careful with, but the fragment in his scar, the nature of Horcruxes, what it meant for Voldemort's return, and what needed to happen before Harry could address his own piece of the problem. She listened without interrupting. When he finished, she sat quietly for a moment, and then she said, "You need to find the others first." "Yes. Do you know how many?" "Not precisely. Ragnar's research suggests somewhere between 5 and 7 total. I've identified 2 almost certainly, a diary that was used during an incident at Hogwarts before I was born, and something in the Black family vault that has a dark magical signature consistent with the Black family vault," she said. "Sirius Black's family." "His family were Death Eaters," Harry said. "Mostly. Not Sirius. But the vault has been flagged." She processed this. "And Dumbledore knows all of this." "He knows most of it," Harry said. "He's been collecting this information for years. He had a plan. His plan involved me being the last piece and walking into it willingly." "So his plan was terrible," she said. "His plan was thorough and considered and arrived at through a logic I can follow step by step," Harry said, "which is what makes it terrible. It's not the plan of a stupid man. It's the plan of a very intelligent man who decided his intelligence exempted him from asking whether anyone else got a say." Hermione was quiet. Then she said, "What's your plan?" "Still working on parts of it," he said. "I could help," she said. Not offering, not hedging. Just stating it, the way she stated facts. "I know," he said. "That's partly why I told you." She looked at him. "Partly. Also," he said, and he was looking at the books on the table rather than at her, which was the closest he came to anything resembling awkwardness, I've not told many people. The things that are actually happening. What's actually at stake. Ragnar, Sirius. Mirabelle knows some of it." He paused. "It's different, telling you." "Why?" He looked up. "Because you'll think about it properly," he said. "You'll find things I haven't found. You'll argue with me when I'm wrong and you'll be right. And I think," he stopped again. "I think working on large problems alone has limits. I think I've been working alone more than I should." She considered him with the same directness she brought to everything. "I'm not going to tell you it'll be fine," she said. "A fragment of the most dangerous dark wizard in a century is living in your scar, and that is genuinely very serious, and I don't see why either of us should pretend otherwise." "Thank you," he said. "But I'm going to help," she said. "However I can. And you should know," she paused, and something moved across her face that was less her usual analytical control and more just her, underneath the precision. "I didn't have friends before. At school, they find me too much," he said. She blinked. "Yes. Me too," he said. "In a different way. But yes." They looked at each other across the books and the afternoon light and the 4 weeks of Thursdays that had assembled themselves into something neither of them had been expecting to find. "Okay," Hermione said. Let's find the Horcruxes. The next 2 years were the most intellectually alive of Harry's life, which was saying something given that the previous 4 years had included a Goblin master class in magical theory and Ragnarok for a teacher. He and Hermione divided the research. She took the historical and textual side. She had a gift for cross-referencing sources that made Ragnarok say, on the one occasion they met, that she would have made an exceptional Goblin archivist, which Hermione received as the significant compliment it was intended to be. Harry took the magical detection side, working with the sensitivity his now unrestrained core gave him, developing the ability to identify dark magical residue at a distance, learning to read the specific frequency of a soul fragment the way he'd learned to read the enchantments on the walls of the assessment room. They found the diary through Hermione's research. It had been used years before and presumably destroyed, but its record existed in the Hogwarts archive and confirmed it as a Horcrux by the magical trace it had left. Item 1, most likely neutralized. They flagged the object in the Black Vault, confirmed by Harry's remote detection work as containing exactly the right quality of dark anchoring. Item 2, location known. They debated at length, in the Flourishes' reading room and at Sirius's flat and in lengthy letters that Hermione wrote in her precise, dense handwriting, about Nagini, Voldemort's snake, which the record suggested had been at his side since before his first fall and which fit the profile. The snake is a problem, Harry said, one afternoon. The others are objects. Objects don't move. The snake moves, Hermione agreed. And it's currently wherever Voldemort is, which is, somewhere diminished. Hiding. Albania, possibly, according to what Sirius remembered hearing before. He gestured vaguely to mean before the war. We can't address the snake until he surfaces, Hermione said. Which means we need to be ready when he does. Yes. She looked at him. How much time do we have? I don't know, he said. The fragment in my scar, it feels different than it did a year ago. More, he searched for the word. More present. Like it's aware I'm aware of it. Like it's been becoming more coherent. He's regaining strength, she said. Yes, he said. We have time. But not infinite time. She nodded, and wrote something in her notebook, and flipped to a new page. The incident with Dumbledore happened in October, in Diagon Alley. Harry and Hermione were coming out of Flourishes with new books. Sirius was meeting them at the far end of the alley. He'd gone to the apothecary for Mirabelle, who was working on a project that required ingredients Sirius had very diplomatically agreed to collect rather than ask Mirabelle to explain. Dumbledore was standing in the alley. Harry saw him from 30 feet away. He was recognizable at any distance, the height, the long robes, the white beard, the specific quality of his presence, which was the presence of someone to whom authority was so natural and long established that it had become invisible to them. He was looking at a display in a shop window, apparently casually, apparently just an old man in the alley on a Thursday afternoon, and Harry would have believed it if he hadn't spent 4 years thinking about exactly who this man was and what he was capable of. Hermione saw him a second after Harry did. She touched Harry's arm, a brief question. Harry kept walking. Same pace. Straight toward him. Dumbledore turned as they approached, which confirmed he'd known they were there, had been waiting for them to reach him. His face was, exactly what Harry had expected. Kind. Warm. The particular expression of a grandfather who has been waiting patiently for a difficult conversation and has decided to lead with gentle concern rather than authority. Harry, he said. His voice was warm as the expression. How you've grown. Professor Dumbledore, Harry said, and stopped at a comfortable conversational distance. Not retreating. Not aggressive. Just, there, meeting his eyes, completely steady. It's been too long, Dumbledore said. He looked at Hermione briefly. And this must be a friend. Hermione Granger, Hermione said, and shook his hand with perfectly appropriate politeness, and her expression gave nothing away, which Harry noted with appreciation. Miss Granger, Dumbledore said. I believe you'll be starting at Hogwarts in a few years. I very much look forward to. I'm going to ask you to get to the point, Harry said. Dumbledore looked at him. The warmth stayed, but something adjusted behind it, a recalibration, a recognition that this approach required modification. I only wanted to say hello, he said. And perhaps to tell you that whatever Ragnarok has told you about me, I form my own opinions, Harry said. Based on evidence. The evidence I have is a complete diagnostic record of 89 enchantments, 73 in your signature, which I have read in full and understand completely. He paused, and his voice was entirely conversational, entirely without heat, which was somehow more effective than anger would have been. I don't need Ragnarok to tell me what to think about that. The record speaks clearly. Harry, Dumbledore said, and his voice shifted slightly, the warmth gaining an underlay of something more serious, something that had survived a century of knowing that he was usually the most important person in any room. I know what those records show. I know how it looks. But there are things I know about what is coming that I cannot share in the middle of Diagon Alley, things that contextualize. If you have relevant information about Voldemort's return, Harry said, you can submit it to Gringotts in writing. That offer still stands. The channel is open. He looked at Dumbledore with clear green eyes that held exactly no deference whatsoever. What I'm not going to do is have a conversation here, or anywhere, in which you try to reframe what you did as a contextualized necessity. I've thought about that framing. I understand it. And I've decided it doesn't hold. Dumbledore was quiet. You're very sure of yourself, he said, and his voice was very quiet, and there was something in it that was genuinely, deeply uncertain, the voice of a man confronting something he did not know how to manage. I've had good teachers, Harry said. He looked at Dumbledore for a moment longer, at this man who was a genuine genius and a genuine disaster, who had loved the idea of Harry Potter more than the reality of him, who had made plans for a child the way an architect makes plans for a building, without asking the building anything, and felt nothing that was in danger of controlling him. Not rage, not fear, not the desperate pull of an absent authority figure. Just clarity. I'll be at Hogwarts in 3 years, Harry said. I look forward to seeing what the school actually is, away from what it's been used for. He paused. That's not a threat. I genuinely look forward to it. He looked at Dumbledore with something that was honest. You built a remarkable school. I think it's worth more than the role it's been playing. He started walking again. Hermione fell into step beside him, and they walked past Dumbledore and down the alley toward where Sirius was waiting at the far end, and Harry did not look back because he had learned, from Petunia of all people, that the way through difficult things was forward. Behind them, Dumbledore stood in the middle of Diagon Alley and watched Harry Potter walk away, and whatever he was feeling about it, whatever he was revising or reconsidering or resolving in that ancient, brilliant, catastrophically certain mind of his, he kept it entirely to himself. That was him, Hermione said, not quite under her breath. Yes, Harry said. He tried to, there was something, in the air, when he was talking, she said. A kind of pressure. At the back of my thoughts. Harry looked at her. You felt it? It means your magical sensitivity is significantly higher than standard, he said. He was attempting a very gentle compulsion. Nothing like what he put on me, just a nudge, a mild inclination toward receptiveness. He paused. It didn't work on you. Because I noticed it, she said. Because you noticed it, he agreed. He looked at her. Hermione. We should start working on a clemency. What's a clemency? Mental defense. I've been practicing for 2 years. Ragnarok's been teaching me. He paused. I should have started teaching you sooner. I'm sorry. She waved this off. When do we start? Saturday, he said. Saturday, she confirmed. They reached Sirius, who took one look at both of them and said, something happened. Dumbledore, Harry said. Sirius's expression went through several things in quick succession and settled on controlled. Did he? Nothing significant, Harry said. He talked. He tried a mild compulsion on Hermione that didn't work. I told him to submit anything useful in writing to Gringotts. Sirius looked at him. And we kept walking, Harry said. Sirius looked at him for another moment, and then he looked up at the sky above Diagon Alley, the late October sky, pale and high and indifferent, with the expression of someone doing rapid emotional arithmetic and arriving at an answer that was equal parts proud and heartbroken. James would have, he stopped. Laughed quietly. James would have said something clever and then done something dramatic and then needed to be talked down from it for the next 3 days. I'm not James, Harry said. No, Sirius agreed. He put his arm briefly around Harry's shoulders, the physical ease between them that had taken a year to develop and was now just how they moved through space together. No, you're not. He looked at Hermione. You all right? I'm fine, Hermione said, with the precision of someone who actually is. Can we get food? I think better when I'm not hungry and I have a lot to think about. Best idea anyone's had today, Sirius said, and steered them both toward the leaky cauldron, and behind them the alley went on with its ordinary business, and Harry walked between his godfather and his best friend in the October light, thinking about soul fragments and occlumency and the specific quality of Dumbledore's face when Harry had looked at him without deference and the old man had, for just a moment, not known what to do with that. It was, Harry thought, the most honest conversation they'd ever had. Chapter 5. The board overturned. The ritual room was 40 feet below the main Gringotts complex, in a part of the building that had been carved during the founding years and had not been significantly modified since. The walls were raw stone, veined with the same amber mineral that ran through the residential quarters but here unpolished, natural, the veins catching the light of the ritual lamps and throwing it back at irregular angles. The floor was inscribed with a ward matrix that had taken Ragnarok and 2 specialist archivists from the Prague branch 4 months to design and 3 weeks to carve. It looked like a language and a map simultaneously, which was, Ragnarok had explained, precisely what it was. Harry was 10 years old and he was standing in the center of it in bare feet because the ward matrix responded better to direct contact, and he was looking at the far wall with the expression he wore when he was reading something complex and needed the room to be quiet. You don't have to do this today, Ragnarok said. I know, Harry said. The preparation is thorough. The probability calculation is favorable. But favorable is not certain, and I want you to understand that. You've told me that 4 times in the last 2 days, Harry said. I understand it. I want to make sure you're choosing this because you've decided it's right, Ragnarok said, not because you feel obligated to. Harry looked at him. If I felt obligated to things I didn't choose, we'd have had a much shorter relationship. He paused. I'm choosing it because every day I don't is a day that thing in my head gets more coherent. I've been feeling it all week. It's been restless. He touched his scar without thinking about it, then stopped. He's close to something. Coming back in some form. And I need to not have his anchor in me when that happens. Ragnarok nodded once. Hermione was sitting on a stone bench along the wall with a notebook on her lap and 3 reference texts beside her. She'd been brought in 2 months ago when the preparation work reached a complexity level that Harry had decided benefited from her specific gifts, and she'd responded by producing a cross-referenced analysis of every documented soul fragment extraction in goblin and human records that Ragnarok had read twice and called the most thorough secondary research document he'd encountered in 40 years. She looked at Harry now and said nothing because she'd already said the things she needed to say, which was one of the things Harry valued most about her. She knew the difference between support that required words and support that required presence. Sirius was by the door. He'd been by the door since they arrived, and he would stay there, because there was nothing useful he could do in the circle and he knew it, and the only way he could be here was to be at the door and be steady. Harry looked at the ward matrix under his feet. At the lamp light in the amber veins. At Ragnarok, who was at the table with the ritual implements arranged in the sequence they'd reviewed together 6 times over the past week, each one discussed, each step understood by both of them, this ritual a collaboration not a procedure performed on him. "Okay," Harry said. "Let's begin." The early stages were almost meditative. Ragnarok worked from the outside of the matrix inward, activating the preparatory wards in sequence, and Harry felt each one engage as a kind of pressure change, the way the atmosphere shifts before a storm. The matrix beneath his feet became gradually warmer. The ambient magic of the room, which Harry could feel as texture against his skin the way other people felt wind, densified. The fragment in his scar was aware. That was the first new thing. It had always been present, always cold, always that faint low-frequency hum of something that didn't belong. Now it was aware of what was happening in a way it hadn't been before, which meant it was reactive, which meant it was going to resist. "It knows," Harry said. Ragnarok paused in his work. "Yes. I expected this. Tell me what you're experiencing." "It's pressing," Harry said. "Outward. Like it's trying to, not leave, more like it's trying to make itself larger. Root more deeply." He breathed steadily. "It's not painful. It's more like argument. It's arguing." "Do not engage with it," Ragnarok said. "Not yet. When we reach stage 4 I'll guide you through the confrontation. Until then, treat it as background." "Understood." The background became more insistent over the next 40 minutes. Not painful. Harry had been prepared for pain and the absence of it was almost stranger than its presence would have been. Instead there was a pressure that was specifically psychological, a cold weight that pressed against the inside of his thoughts and kept suggesting, in something below the level of language, that this was wrong, that this was dangerous, that stopping was the correct choice. Harry recognized it. He'd had 2 years of occlumency practice specifically for this. He didn't fight the suggestions, fighting gave them traction, he simply observed them the way you observe weather, noted them, and let them pass through without landing. "Stage 4, Ragnarok said. "Harry. I need you to look at it now." This was the part of the ritual they discussed most carefully, because it required Harry to do something that ran against every rational instinct, to turn his full attention toward the fragment, to make contact with it deliberately, to hold it in his awareness long enough for Ragnarok to work the extraction without the fragment retreating deeper into the neural architecture it had spent 9 years embedding itself in. Harry turned his attention toward his scar. The cold thing he'd been treating as background rushed forward immediately, filling the space of his attention with the specific heavy darkness of something very old and very angry and entirely stripped of its human context. This was not Voldemort as a person. This was not even Voldemort as a mind. This was a piece of a soul that had been deliberately fractured and anchored, and what remained in it was not thought or personality but the pure distilled essence of what you had to become in order to fracture your own soul on purpose. It was enormous, in the way a sound is enormous when you're standing next to its source. Harry held steady. This required everything. Not power. Not magical force. Just the specific, stripped-down refusal to be moved. He breathed. The amber veins in the walls pulsed with the rhythm of the ward matrix. Ragnarok's instruments made sounds he could hear at the edge of hearing. Hermione, on her bench, had stopped writing. Come on then, Harry thought, not at the fragment but at himself, the same thing he'd said every morning of the past year during occlumency practice. You've held worse. Hold it. The fragment pressed. Harry held. Good, Ragnarok said, very quietly. Stay exactly there. I'm beginning the extraction. What followed was, the word that came to Harry afterward was archaeology. Not surgery, because surgery was precise and quick and aimed at removal. This was more like excavating something that had been buried a long time and had become part of the surrounding material, requires patience and continuous attention and the specific skill of separating what belongs from what doesn't without destroying either in the process. Ragnarok worked for an hour. Harry stood in the center of the matrix and held the fragment in his attention for an hour, which was the longest sustained magical effort he had ever made and which, he would think about later, was not the kind of effort that showed. There was nothing dramatic about it from the outside, a boy standing still in a lit room, eyes open, breathing steadily. Everything was happening in the interior, in the specific architecture of his consciousness, in the careful act of keeping his attention on something that wanted him to stop looking at it. The moment of extraction was sudden. Not painful, a brief, bright sensation that wasn't pain so much as its structural opposite, the feeling of something removed that had been generating a constant low-level ache by its presence, and the absence of the ache was so complete and so clean that it hit like cold water. Harry gasped. The ward matrix beneath his feet flared amber gold and then went dark. Every lamp in the room brightened simultaneously and then settled. Harry stood in the silence and breathed and felt, the inside of his own head for the first time in his life without the cold presence he had always treated as background, and the difference was, he had thought, before, that the fragment was like a noise you'd lived with long enough to stop noticing. He'd been wrong. It was more fundamental than that. It was like a color tint on everything, a filter through which he had perceived the world his entire life, and without it the world was, more present. More his. The colors were brighter not because they'd changed but because nothing was muting them. "Harry," Sirius said, from the door. "I'm fine," Harry said, which was the habitual response, and then he stopped and said, "No. Better than fine. He didn't have the word. "I'm myself," he said. "Just, myself." Sirius made the sound he made when he was not going to cry and was preventing this through significant effort. Ragnarok was at the stone table with the fragment contained in a ritual vessel, a small glass globe wrapped in ward-inscribed silver, the thing inside it small and dark and currently still, no longer animated by proximity to its anchor. He looked at it without satisfaction, just the careful assessment of a job completed correctly. "It will need to be destroyed," he said. "In conjunction with the other Horcruxes. Not separately." "I know," Harry said. He walked to the edge of the matrix and stepped off it, onto the plain stone floor, and the world was still different, still his, in this new undiluted way. "How many confirmed now?" "The diary is destroyed," Hermione said, from her bench. She had her notebook open and was reading from it with the automatic precision of someone who has been building this list carefully. "Confirmed by the archive trace evidence. The locket in the Black Vault, Sirius has authorized access, we can retrieve it directly. The cup, which the research suggests was given to Bellatrix Lestrange for safekeeping, also in a Gringotts vault," Harry said. "Also in a Gringotts vault," Hermione confirmed, with the slight dryness of someone noting an irony. "The diadem, we believe it's at Hogwarts. In the Room of Requirement, based on the Founding-era documents and the magical resonance signatures." She looked at her notes. "Nagini remains the problem." "Nagini remains the problem," Harry agreed. "And then there's the question," Hermione said, in the careful tone she used for things that required careful handling, "of whether there are others we haven't identified." "There aren't," Harry said. She looked at him. "You're sure?" "I've been connected to that fragment for 10 years, Harry said. "I know the frequency. I know its shape. I've felt, through it, it's like a string between instruments in an orchestra, you can feel the others resonating along it." He paused. "There are 6. We're 6. Diary gone, the one in my head gone. 4 remaining, locket, cup, diadem, snake. And then Voldemort himself as the 7th anchor." "The fragment gave you that information," Hermione said. "The fragment gave me access to information without meaning to," Harry said. "Which is probably one of the reasons Dumbledore wanted it to stay." He looked at Ragnarok. He was going to use it. "Let me gather information through the connection and then, use you as an intelligence asset," Ragnarok said, "until you were no longer useful in that capacity." "Right," Harry said. The room was quiet for a moment. I want to do the locket today, Harry said. Harry, Sirius said. Not the ritual. Not the destruction. I want to retrieve it. Now, while we're here, he looked at Sirius. I want to move forward. I don't want to sit with what we've just done and let it become weight. I want to use the momentum. Sirius looked at Ragnarok. The locket retrieval is straightforward, Ragnarok said. It is in a black family vault. Sirius has authority. The vault can be accessed today. He paused. The object will be hostile. It is a Horcrux, it will attempt psychological manipulation of whoever handles it. I'll handle it, Harry said. I know what that frequency feels like now. I'll know the difference. I'll come, Hermione said, closing her notebook. You don't have to, Harry started. I cross-referenced 40 years of goblin records on soul fragment containment to write your preparation document, she said. I'm coming. The Black Family Vault was 3 levels below the main vault floor, in a section of Gringotts that had the specific atmospheric quality of old money that had decided it was too good for the company of newer money. The cart ride down was long and the vault door was carved with the Black family crest and the motto Toujours Per, which Sirius looked at with an expression that was equal parts old pain and active contempt. I hated this motto my entire childhood, he said, while Ragnarok worked the vault seals. It's a stupid motto, Harry said. My mother was very proud of it. That tracks. Sirius looked at him sidelong. You've been spending too much time with Hermione. You're getting drier. I've always been dry, Harry said. You just didn't notice at first. James was not dry, Sirius said. James was enthusiastic. We've established I'm not James. You're about 30% James, Sirius said. The rest is all Lily and something neither of them were. He looked at the vault door. Which is probably for the best given the current circumstances. The vault opened. The locket was in a case on the 3rd shelf, inside a wooden box that had been sealed with 3 separate enchantments, not to keep thieves out, Harry suspected, but to keep whatever was inside from interacting with the rest of the vault's contents. Someone in the Black family had known what they had. He reached for it. Hermione said, "Wait." She opened her notebook to a flagged page. Protective gloves. The Prague record specifically noted direct skin contact accelerates the psychological projection. Harry accepted the gloves she produced from her bag, dragon hide, goblin prepared, warded against magical intrusion, and picked up the box. The locket, through the box, through the gloves, was already pushing. Harry felt it the moment his hands closed around the case, that cold frequency, different from the fragment in his scar but recognizable as the same species of darkness, the same stripped of humanity essence. It pressed against his perception and offered him something, the way the scar fragment had offered him something, but where the scar had offered cold and presence and the weight of a will that wanted to subsume, this offered, "You know what you are," it seemed to say, in the language below language that Horcruxes apparently used. You know they're using you. All of them. Ragnarok with his legal machinations. The girl with her notebooks. The godfather who wasn't there. Interesting pitch, Harry said aloud. What? Sirius said. It's trying a different approach than the scar fragment, Harry said. He looked at the box in his hands with clinical interest. The scar was about dominance. This one is about doubt. It's telling me the people around me are using me. Is it working? Hermione asked. Harry considered it honestly. The thing in the box was not nothing, it had a real weight to it, a genuine cold pull. It was working in the way gravity works, always present, always in a particular direction. It's noticeable, he said. But no. The argument doesn't hold because I've actually thought about those questions already and I know what I concluded. He looked at Hermione. The fact that you're useful to my situation doesn't mean you're only using me. Correct, she said. And the fact that Ragnak has legal and institutional interests aligned with mine doesn't mean his care is conditional on those interests. Also correct, Ragnak said, from the vault entrance. And Sirius, Harry said, looking at his godfather, wasn't there because he was in prison for something he didn't do, which is Dumbledore's fault and Wormtail's, not his. Sirius looked at him. Yeah, that's accurate. The locket makes good arguments, Harry said, setting the box in the containment vessel Hermione had prepared. It just makes them to someone who has done the relevant thinking already. He sealed the vessel. Let's get out of here. This room smells like my grandparents' idea of what power looks like. It does, actually, Sirius said, looking at the shelves of dark objects and heavy silver and the faded portraits of black ancestors who all wore the same expression of aggrieved entitlement. God, I hated growing up here. He looked around the vault one more time. This all belongs to Harry now, technically. We'll deal with the dark objects properly, Harry said. Everything else can wait. Anything you want to keep? Sirius asked him. Harry looked at the vault. At the accumulated weight of a family that had spent centuries arranging things to matter after their deaths. He looked at it for a moment. The books, he said. Whatever isn't cursed. Some of them will be useful. Practical, Hermione murmured approvingly. Let's go, Harry said. The following month was the Wisengamot. It wasn't supposed to be. What was supposed to happen in October was a quiet legal filing, Ragnak and 2 solicitors, a procedural extension of the formal protection status Gringotts had maintained on Harry since he was 4, but procedural filings had a way of becoming less procedural when someone at the ministry decided the situation had become politically inconvenient. The someone, in this case, was Dolores Umbridge, who was senior undersecretary to the current minister and who had apparently decided that Gringotts' ongoing protection of Harry Potter represented an unacceptable precedent for goblin overreach into wizarding legal matters. She filed a counter-petition. Harry read it at breakfast and handed it to Sirius without comment. Sirius read it and said several things that were not suitable for the table. Hermione read it after Sirius and said, she's not actually wrong about the procedural mechanism she's using. The 1962 Magical Jurisdiction Clarification Act does give the Ministry grounds to contest goblin legal protection of human minors under certain circumstances. She's using a legitimate tool to do an illegitimate thing, Harry said. That's different from being right. What are the circumstances she's claiming? Sirius asked. She's arguing that the protection was obtained under false pretenses, Hermione said, still reading. That the diagnostic record Gringotts used to justify the protection was, she paused. She's calling it fabricated. The kitchen was quiet. She's calling Ragnak a liar, Harry said. She's suggesting the diagnostic was manipulated, Hermione said precisely. Which is the same thing with an extra layer of plausible deniability. Harry set down his toast. He looked at the window. Ragnak is going to be, Ragnak said, appearing in the kitchen doorway in the way he occasionally did when matters required his personal attention and mirror communication was insufficient, is aware. He set a copy of the petition on the table, his own, with extensive notations in the margin. The ministry owl arrived at Gringotts at 6 this morning. She's claiming fabrication, Harry said. Yes, Ragnak said. He pulled out a chair and sat down at the kitchen table, which he had never done before. The domesticity of it was somehow significant. She will be presenting this claim before the Wisengamot in 2 weeks. He looked at Harry. They want to see you. Of course they do, Harry said. You are the subject of the petition. Your presence will be required. He paused. This is the moment several things converge. The protection status. The diagnostic record. Your noble house seats, which you have not yet formally claimed. The outstanding questions about Dumbledore. He looked at Harry steadily. This is the moment we have been building toward for 6 years, and it has arrived on Umbridge's timeline rather than ours. Does that matter? Harry said. Ragnock thought about it honestly. Less than it would have 2 years ago, he said. You are as prepared as you were going to be. The evidence is complete. The Horcrux work, he paused. The Horcrux work continues regardless, Harry said. The Wizengamot doesn't change that timeline. No, Ragnock agreed. So we go, Harry said. We take the seats. We bring the diagnostic. We let Umbridge make her argument and then we answer it. He looked at Ragnock. Is there anything she has that we don't? She has Ministry institutional support, Ragnock said. Current Minister Cornelius Fudge has not explicitly endorsed her action, but he has not opposed it either, which amounts to the same thing. She has political relationships and a gift for the specific kind of bureaucratic maneuvering that operates in rooms rather than on paper. He paused. She also has a genuine belief in what she's doing, which makes her more dangerous than someone acting purely from political calculation. What does she actually want? Hermione asked. Control, Harry said. Not of me specifically. She wants the precedent. If she can establish that Gringotts cannot legally protect a wizarding child against the Ministry's wishes, that's useful for everything that comes after, any time the Ministry wants to act against someone who has goblin legal standing. He looked at Ragnock. This is about you as much as me. It is, Ragnock said. Yes. Then we win it for both reasons, Harry said. The preparation was Hermione's domain, and she approached it with the focused ferocity she brought to everything she decided mattered. She read every piece of Wizengamot procedure documentation going back to 1700. She cross-referenced the 1962 Act against 30 years of subsequent case law. She built a legal argument document that was 60 pages long and so precisely constructed that Ragnock's legal team read it, made 11 minor amendments, and incorporated it wholesale into their formal response. Sirius prepared differently. He spent 2 weeks reconnecting with every person he'd known before Azkaban who still held any standing in wizarding society, not asking for favors. He was very careful about this, very particular, but reminding the world that he existed, that he was exonerated, that he had views on the current situation. Harry prepared in his own way, which was to sit with the Ward Matrix documents and the Horcrux research and the diagnostic record and Dumbledore's letter and the transcripts of both Sirius's hearing and Dumbledore's censure, and to think about what story the Wizengamot would be hearing and what story was actually true and how to make those two things into the same story in a room full of people who had strong institutional incentives to hear only the one that required them to do nothing. He was 10 years old and he went into the Wizengamot chamber in formal robes. Sirius had insisted, and Harry had agreed because the occasion warranted it, walking beside Ragnock, with Hermione in the public gallery above and Sirius in the family seats to the right, and he walked in with the specific quality of ease that comes not from confidence in the audience but from confidence in yourself, and he sat down in the chair that was provided for the subject of the petition, and he looked at the room. The Wizengamot chamber was circular and tiered, with the members seated in rows around the central floor where the subject and their representatives stood. There were 63 current members present. Harry looked at each section methodically, cataloging them the way Ragnock had taught him: the old money families who would vote on instinct and heritage, the ministry-aligned members who would take their cue from Fudge's people, the independents who were the actual audience, the ones who could be moved by argument rather than allegiance. Umbridge was in the ministry section. She was a small woman with a toad-like quality to her face that would have been funny in other circumstances, and she was watching Harry with small, sharp eyes that were professionally pleasant on the surface and deeply certain underneath. She had, Harry noted, the same quality Dumbledore had, the quality of someone who believed absolutely that they were right and had stopped examining that belief some time ago. The difference was that Dumbledore's certainty was informed by genuine intelligence and genuine loss. Umbridge's was informed by institutional power and genuine contempt. Dumbledore thought Harry needed to be shaped into something useful. Umbridge thought Harry needed to be controlled because control was the correct relationship between authority and individuals. Harry found Dumbledore's version harder to argue against, but Umbridge's version easier to beat. Interim Chief Warlock Ogden called the session to order. He was old and tired and conducted the proceedings with the air of a man who had not wanted this particular political situation and had no idea how it had landed on his schedule. Umbridge presented her case for 40 minutes. It was technically accomplished, she had clearly worked on it, and it did exactly what Hermione had predicted it would do, using the 1962 Act's jurisdictional language to argue that Gringotts had exceeded its remit by maintaining legal protection over a British wizarding minor without ongoing Wizengamot oversight. She did not call the diagnostic fabricated outright. She called it unverified by independent wizarding authority, which was the version of the accusation that was legally actionable without being legally actionable. Then Ragnarok stood. Harry had seen Ragnarok in many contexts over 6 years. He had seen him at the stone table in the assessment room, at breakfast in the flat, in the ritual chamber, in vaults, in archived libraries, in the formal correspondence room where he wrote letters that changed things. He had never seen him in a room like this, standing before 63 wizarding legislators, and the difference was nothing. Ragnarok in the Wizengamot chamber was exactly Ragnarok at the stone table. The room had not changed him at all. He presented the diagnostic record. He presented the methodology. He presented the credentials of every goblin involved in the assessment. He presented the Edinburgh archivist's corroborating analysis. He presented the Prague specialist's ritual documentation. He presented 60 years of Gringotts' magical assessment history and the 0 cases in that history where a diagnostic had been successfully challenged on grounds of fabrication. Then he looked at Umbridge and said, "The senior undersecretary's claim that this diagnostic is unverified by independent wizarding authority is technically accurate and substantively meaningless. The diagnostic exists in a form that any qualified magical practitioner can independently verify. We invited the ministry to send a representative to conduct independent verification 6 weeks ago. The ministry did not respond to this invitation." Umbridge's expression didn't change, but something moved underneath it. "The invitation remains open," Ragnarok said. "If the Wizengamot wishes to appoint an independent examiner to review the diagnostic record, Gringotts will provide full access." He paused, and his amber eyes moved across the tiered seats with the serene patience of someone who has already won and is waiting for the room to catch up. "However, I would direct the Wizengamot's attention to the fact that the diagnostic record is not actually under contest here. What is under contest is whether Gringotts has the legal standing to act on its contents. And for that question, the relevant precedent is not the 1962 Act but the Treaty of 1752, under which Gringotts Bank operates as sovereign territory with full legal jurisdiction over all matters affecting its clients." He set a document on the central table. "I have brought a copy of the relevant section." The independent members were already reading. Ogden looked at the document. Looked at Umbridge. Looked at Ragnarok. He had the expression of a man who had wanted this to go differently and was now adjusting to a reality in which it hadn't. "The Undersecretary will have an opportunity to respond," he said. Umbridge responded. She was good. She pivoted quickly to a subsidiary argument about the treaty's scope, argued that the 1752 provisions had been superseded in specific areas by subsequent legislation, cited 3 cases. She was professionally precise and entirely committed to her position. Then Harry stood. Ragnarok glanced at him. They had discussed this. Harry speaking directly was not required by procedure and carried risk, the risk being that a 10-year-old addressing the Wizengamot was either going to be impressive or embarrassing, and the line between those two outcomes in a politically charged room was not always under the speaker's control. Harry had said, in that conversation, "I know. I'm going to do it anyway." He stood up and he said, "I'd like to address the chamber, if that's permitted." Ogden looked at him. Looked at the room. "The subject of the petition has the right to address the chamber directly," he said. "You have the floor, Mr. Potter." Harry looked at the room. At the 63 members in their tiered seats. At Umbridge, whose pleasantly certain expression had acquired a slight quality of wariness. At Dumbledore, who was present in the public gallery and who Harry had not acknowledged yet and did not acknowledge now. "I've been listening to this debate," Harry said, "and I want to make sure we're all clear about what's actually at stake, because I think the procedural arguments on both sides, however accurate, are describing the question from a distance." His voice was level and clear and carried in the circular chamber in the way things carry when they're not trying to carry, not projected, just present. "When I was 4 years old, my aunt brought me to Gringotts because she was afraid something was wrong with me. She was right. The diagnostic found 89 illegal enchantments in my body. 73 of them were cast by Albus Dumbledore, the former chief warlock of this body, who sits in the gallery today." He did not look at the gallery. "Those enchantments included compulsion spells designed to make me willing to die on his instruction. They included a soul leash that allowed him to kill me at any time of his choosing. They included memory blocks on my parents' deaths, placed specifically to prevent me from knowing them as people rather than as leverage." The chamber was completely silent. "Gringotts removed them," Harry said. "That removal took 2 months and was among the more painful things I've experienced. It was also the best thing that has ever been done for me, and it was done by goblins, specifically because the wizarding legal system had no mechanism that would have allowed a 4-year-old to petition for his own protection. The legal mechanism that allowed it was the Treaty of 1752 and Gringotts' sovereign jurisdiction." He paused. "The senior undersecretary wants to limit that jurisdiction. I want the Wisengamot to understand exactly what was standing between me and those 89 enchantments, and what would have been standing there instead if goblin legal protection didn't exist." He let that sit for a moment. "I'm 10 years old," he said. "I have 4 noble house seats in this chamber that I haven't formally claimed because I've been busy. I have a complete diagnostic record that the ministry was invited to independently verify and chose not to. And I have a great deal of respect for the question of what this body's oversight of goblin ministry relations should look like, because it's a legitimate question and it deserves a real answer." He looked at Umbridge, directly, for the first time. "But I want to be honest about what this particular petition is actually doing. It's not protecting wizarding children from unverified goblin assessments. It's removing the only legal tool that allowed one specific child to be protected from an adult who had structured an entire magical, legal, and political system around that child's eventual death." Umbridge said, "Mr. Potter, the petition has nothing to do with..." "The petition," Harry said, "was filed 2 weeks after I removed a Horcrux from my own scar." He said it completely calmly, the way you say things you've thought about very carefully and decided to say precisely because you've thought about them carefully. "The timing is interesting." The chamber exploded. It took Ogden 4 attempts and his wand producing a sound like a cannon to restore order, and in the noise Harry sat back down and Ragnarok remained standing with his arms folded and the expression of someone who had expected exactly this and found it confirmed. In the public gallery, Hermione had her notebook open and was writing at speed. In the family seats, Sirius was very still, watching the room with the eyes of someone cataloging every reaction, every alliance revealed by who looked at who. In the gallery, Dumbledore was watching Harry with an expression that was complicated, and genuine, and too far away to read completely, but which contained, Harry would think later, something that might have been a kind of grief. Not for the plan that was coming apart. For the boy it had always been about. It took an hour for the debate to resolve. 3 independent members called for an emergency review of the Dumbledore censure in light of the Horcrux statement. 2 ministry-aligned members attempted to question the veracity of the Horcrux claim and were silenced by Ragnarok producing documentation of the extraction ritual with all 3 Prague specialists' signed testimony attached. Umbridge attempted twice to redirect proceedings back to the jurisdictional question and was talked over both times by members who had clearly decided the jurisdictional question was no longer the most important thing in the room. The vote on the petition was 41 to 22 against the ministry's position. The goblin protection status was confirmed. The Treaty of 1752 was confirmed as superseding the 1962 Act in matters where a documented crime against a minor had been committed. The Dumbledore emergency review was formally initiated. Harry walked out of the chamber and into the corridor, and the door closed behind him, and he leaned against the wall for exactly 30 seconds, the only 30 seconds of the entire day in which he allowed the magnitude of what had just happened to be fully present rather than managed, and then he straightened up and looked at Ragnarok. "The diadem is next," he said. "You just survived the Wizengamot," Ragnarok said. "And now we find the diadem. I said we'd use the momentum." He looked up the corridor where Sirius and Hermione were coming toward him, Sirius walking fast with the expression of someone who has been keeping themselves very controlled for 3 hours and is now near someone it's safe to stop doing that around. "I meant it both times." Sirius reached him and put both hands on his shoulders and looked at him and said, "You said Horcrux in the Wizengamot." "Yes," Harry said. "To 63 members of the wizarding government." "It needed to be said publicly," Harry said. "So that when Voldemort comes back, and he's coming, it's months now, not years, they can't pretend they didn't know. They can't manage the information." He looked at Sirius. "I needed it on the record." Sirius looked at him for a long moment. Then he pulled him forward into a hug that was brief and fierce and carried 4 years of making up for lost time. Harry let him, and put his arms around him, because this was one of the things he'd learned to do, to let people who loved him do the things love required. "Okay," Sirius said, stepping back, jaw set. "What's the diadem?" "Rowena Ravenclaw's diadem," Hermione said, appearing at Harry's shoulder with her notebook open. "Lost for centuries, believed destroyed, actually hidden in the room of requirement at Hogwarts. We're going to need access to the school. Do we know someone who can get us in?" Harry and Hermione both looked at him. "Right," Sirius said. "Right, obviously not, okay, different question. Do we know someone who has the authority to authorize a visit to Hogwarts by a 10-year-old who just lit up the Wizengamot?" Ragnarok had his correspondence seal out before Sirius finished the sentence. The corridor outside the Wizengamot chamber was cold and high-ceilinged and smelled like stone and old decisions, and outside it the magical world was already changing, already processing what it had heard, already revising what it thought it knew, already preparing for the thing that was coming in ways it had been trying not to prepare for since 1981. Harry straightened his robes and looked at Hermione's notebook and said, "Tell me what you've got on the room of requirement." She turned to the flagged page. They got to work. Chapter 6, The Boy Who Chose the Hogwarts Letter arrived on a Tuesday. Harry was in the kitchen of the London flat making tea when the owl came through the window, a school owl, tawny and efficient, carrying an envelope sealed with the Hogwarts crest in red wax. It landed on the counter, held out its leg, and looked at Harry with the mild professional indifference of postal animals everywhere. Harry took the letter. The owl accepted a piece of toast crust from the counter and left. He opened it standing up, reading it the way he read everything, quickly, completely, with the tea steeping forgotten beside him. "Dear Mr. Potter, we are pleased to inform you that you have been accepted at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Please find enclosed a list of all necessary books and equipment. Term begins on September 1st. We await your owl by no later than July 31st. Yours sincerely, Minerva McGonagall, Deputy Headmistress. Standard letter. The same one sent to every 11-year-old in Britain with magic in their blood. No special acknowledgement, no asterisk, no note about the fact that he was Harry Potter, and therefore this particular letter had a quality of inevitability to it that most acceptance letters didn't carry. He liked that about it, actually. Sirius appeared in the doorway in his dressing gown, hair going in 17 directions, clearly having heard the owl. He looked at the letter in Harry's hand and his face did the complicated thing. "Hogwarts," he said. "Hogwarts," Harry confirmed. "You knew it was coming." "Obviously." Sirius leaned against the doorframe. "You don't have to go," he said. It came out careful, like something he'd been rehearsing. "Your education is, you're beyond the curriculum already, in most subjects. You could continue with Mirabelle, with Ragnarok, and, I want to go," Harry said. Sirius stopped. "I've wanted to go since I was 6 and read the founding-era documents," Harry said. "Hogwarts is remarkable. The enchantments in that building are 1,000 years old and still operational and still coherent, which means whoever built them understood magical architecture at a level that nobody has matched since. I want to be in that building. I want to study in that library." He paused. "I also want to be somewhere with other children my age, which is," he stopped. "I'm aware I'm not typical. I'm aware that creates a certain dynamic with peers. But I'd like to try." Sirius was quiet for a moment. "Hermione will be a year behind you." "I know. That'll be hard." "I know that too." He poured his tea, which had been steeping several minutes longer than intended and was consequently quite strong. "She and I have discussed it. She's not worried." "She's not worried about anything," Sirius said, with the affectionate exasperation he'd developed for Hermione over 3 years of her appearing in their flat to argue about research and eat most of their biscuits. "She worries about plenty," Harry said. "She just doesn't show it in ways that are immediately legible." He sat down with his tea. "I'm going to write back today. And then I'm going to write to Ragnarok, because there are conditions." Sirius raised an eyebrow. "Conditions?" "Conditions," Harry said. "I'm not going to Hogwarts as a student who happens to be Harry Potter. I'm going as Harry Potter, with full legal standing, for noble house seats active, Gringotts protection status intact, and an understanding with the current administration about what oversight of me actually means and what it doesn't." He looked at Sirius over his tea. "Dumbledore is still headmaster. He had his censure, which restricted his ability to act as guardian or magical overseer of minors in a legal capacity," Harry said. "It didn't remove him from Hogwarts. He's still there. And Hogwarts is his home in a way that it isn't anywhere else, which means on his territory he has advantages he doesn't have anywhere else." He thought about it. "I'm not afraid of him. But I'm also not naive about what his home ground means." Sirius looked at him. "So what are the conditions?" "Ragnarok will draw them up," Harry said. "But the substance is, formal recognition of my noble house status within the school's legal framework. No magical monitoring or oversight of me without written consent, explicitly, because of what he did before and because the censure needs teeth in the school context. And I want McGonagall to know everything before I arrive." "McGonagall," Sirius said. "Why?" "Because she's been at that school for 30 years and she loves it like it's alive," Harry said. "And she's not Dumbledore. She thinks he walks on water, probably, but she has her own ethics and they're not entirely subordinate to his." He paused. "She deserves to know what she's working with." Sirius looked at him across the kitchen table. "You've been thinking about this for a while." "Since we retrieved the diadem," Harry said. "Which had been 4 months ago." The diadem retrieval had required a formal visit to Hogwarts, authorized reluctantly by Dumbledore after Ragnarok made it clear that the alternative was a public filing with the International Confederation citing an outstanding magical hazard on school grounds that the headmaster had declined to address. They'd gone in June, Harry and Ragnarok and Sirius and Hermione, walking through the entrance hall of a school that was empty for summer, and the building had done something to Harry that he still hadn't found the right words for. It had recognized him. Not magically, not in any demonstrable way. Just, the building was very old and very aware in the way of things that have been loved and inhabited for a very long time, and Harry had walked in and felt it settle around him like something that had been waiting. Hermione had noticed his face and said nothing, which was the right response. Sirius had looked at the ceiling of the entrance hall and looked like he was 19 again for a moment. Ragnarok had walked through it with his eyes moving over every visible surface with the assessment attention of someone reading a very old text. The room of requirement had taken some finding. Harry had walked the 7th floor corridor 3 times while Hermione checked her notes and Ragnarok consulted the architectural documents, and then Harry had stopped and said, "I need the room where Rowena Ravenclaw's diadem is hidden," thinking it clearly and directly, and a door had appeared. The room beyond it was enormous and piled with centuries of things, lost objects, forgotten possessions, the accumulated debris of 1,000 years of students hiding things they didn't want found. The diadem was on a carved wooden bust near the back, half buried under a rolled carpet and what appeared to be a stuffed troll leg. It looked like a mistake. It looked like something accidentally left there. Harry had felt it from the doorway. The same frequency as the locket, as the scar fragment, dark, anchored, old. He'd retrieved it with the dragon hide gloves and the containment vessel, and he'd walked out of the room of requirement and back down through the school, and in the entrance hall, on his way out, he'd stopped and put his hand on the stone wall. The school had, he couldn't explain it better than this, the school had answered. "We'll come back," he'd said, not to the people with him. To the building. And he'd walked out into the June sunshine with a Horcrux in his bag and the specific certainty that this place mattered, that whatever Dumbledore had built and however it had been used, the school itself was something worth having. That was why he wanted to go. He wrote to Ragnarok first, then to McGonagall directly, a letter that was long and specific and that he spent an evening drafting with a care he didn't usually spend on correspondence, because he needed her to understand without feeling ambushed and without feeling that he was issuing ultimatums, because he wasn't. He was providing context. There was a difference. McGonagall's response arrived 48 hours later and was 4 pages long. It was written in the precise, energetic hand of someone who had strong feelings and had decided to express them with full rigor. It covered her reaction to the diagnostic record, which she had apparently immediately requested a copy of from the ministry and spent 24 hours reading, and which had produced a response in her that she described as requiring a period of private reflection. It covered her position on the Noble House legal framework and what she was and was not empowered to guarantee within the school's current administrative structure. It covered Dumbledore, carefully, with the specific carefulness of someone who loves a person and is in the process of being honest about their limitations, and it said that she could not speak for him but she could speak for the school's educational function, which was and had always been her primary concern. And then it said, at the bottom, in slightly different handwriting, slightly less controlled, as though she'd put the quill down and picked it up again, "Mr. Potter. I taught your mother. She was one of the finest students I have encountered in 30 years of teaching, and your father was one of the most infuriating, in the specific way that very talented young people who know it are infuriating. I failed to protect them from the situation they were placed in by decisions made above my authority. I will not fail in the same way twice. You have my word, for whatever it is worth to you." Harry read this paragraph twice and then folded the letter and put it in the desk drawer where he kept things that mattered. He wrote back and said her word was worth a great deal, and confirmed his acceptance. Ragnarok arrived on the last week of August with 3 legal documents, a list of 14 specific provisions he intended to formalize with the school's Board of Governors before September 1st, and the expression of someone who has been preparing for this particular deployment for 7 years. He sat down at the kitchen table with Harry, Sirius, and Hermione, who had come over, ostensibly to help Harry pack but actually because she did not intend to be excluded from anything important, and went through the documents line by line. "The Noble House seats," Ragnarok said, "have been formally registered with the Wisengamot. You are now on record as holding the Potter, Black through maternal designation, Peveril, and Gryffindor founders' seats. This gives you voting rights and legal standing in any Wisengamot proceeding, which the school's charter means extends into matters of school governance. Dumbledore sits on the board," Sirius said. "Dumbledore has a non-voting advisory position on the board following his censure," Ragnarok said, "which he has retained through the specific provision in the censure that allows continued headmastership under monitored conditions. Your Gryffindor founder's seat technically outranks his advisory position in matters of school administration." Harry absorbed this. "Does he know that?" "He has been informed," Ragnarok said. His response was, a brief pause. "Philosophical. What does that mean?" He wrote back and said that he hoped you would use your legal position wisely and in service of the school's students, Ragnarok said. "Which is either genuine or an attempt to co-opt you into feeling invested in the same outcomes he wants." He looked at Harry. I leave it to you to determine which. Probably both, Harry said. He's good at that. The second document covered the monitoring prohibition, formal, legally binding, explicit. No magical surveillance of Harry Potter within the school grounds without his written and witnessed consent. No tracking enchantments. No compulsion attempts. The wording was dense and specific, and Harry read every line of it and suggested 2 amendments that Ragnarok acknowledged with the slight nod he used when something was correct. The third document was the one Harry had drafted himself, and he set it on the table and said, "This one's different. This one's not about protections." The others looked at it. "It's a proposal," Harry said, "for a formal restructuring of how Hogwarts handles students in vulnerable situations. A standing process, outside the headmaster's authority, directly accountable to the board, for students who need independent advocacy. Medical, legal, or otherwise." He paused. "Because the reason Dumbledore was able to do what he did to me was partly about his specific choices, but it was also about the absence of any structure that would have caught it earlier." Petunia walked into Gringotts on instinct. It should have been a system. Hermione was reading the document with the focused attention she gave things she was evaluating. "This would significantly limit the headmaster's unilateral power over student welfare decisions," she said. "Yes," Harry said. "The board will push back." "Some of them will," Harry said. "Others will support it because it protects them from liability." He looked at Sirius. "You know the current board members. Who can we talk to before September?" Sirius already had a mental list running. Harry could see it in his eyes. "Griselda Marchbanks owes me a dinner conversation. Tiberius Ogden's been sympathetic since the hearing. Abbott's a maybe, Greengrass is a definite no, Longbottom might surprise you." "Neville's grandmother?" Hermione said. "Augusta Longbottom has been on the board for 15 years and she is not, despite appearances, a fan of unchecked administrative power," Sirius said. "She's had reasons not to be." He glanced at Harry, a silent reference to Neville, who Harry had met briefly at the Wisengamot, had been observing from a respectful distance, had filed under person who deserves better than what they've been given and was keeping in mind. "Start with Longbottom and Marchbanks," Harry said. "If we get 3 board members on record before September, the proposal has traction." Ragnarok picked up the document. "I will formalize it as a legal filing," he said. "A proposal requires a formal mechanism to be considered at the next board meeting." "The next board meeting," Hermione said, looking at her notes, "is the 2nd week of September. After term starts. So we arrive with the filing already in place," Harry said. "Good." He looked at the kitchen table covered in documents and legal provisions and Hermione's notes and Sirius's mental list and Ragnarok's sealed correspondence, and he felt, not the weight of it, exactly. More the shape of it. The accumulated specificity of 7 years of work, all pointing toward the same place. "Right," he said. "Let's pack." The night before September 1st, Harry sat on his bed in the flat and looked at his trunk, packed, latched, ready, and the owl that was going to be his at Hogwarts, a small tawny thing he'd named Pixel because Hermione had laughed at the name and he'd decided that was reason enough to keep it. The flat was quiet. Sirius was in the living room not sleeping, which Harry could hear in the specific quality of the silence. He picked up the stuffed owl from the bed. Lily's owl, worn and soft and carrying 22 years of being held by people who needed it. He turned it over in his hands. He wasn't taking it to Hogwarts. Not because he didn't want it there but because he'd thought about it and decided it belonged in the flat, on the shelf, where it would be when he came home. That distinction mattered to him. He set it on the shelf. He went to the living room and sat down next to Sirius on the couch, and Sirius looked at him with the expression he'd been wearing all evening, the one that was trying very hard not to be a sad expression and was mostly succeeding. "I'll be home for Christmas," Harry said. "I know," Sirius said. "And Hogsmeade weekends once I'm in 3rd year." "I know. And you can send letters." "Harry, Sirius said, with a quality in his voice that was very close to fond exasperation but had too much other emotion in it for that label to quite work. I know all of that. I'm not worried about the logistics. What are you worried about? Sirius was quiet for a moment. I'm worried that I'll miss it, he said. The day-to-day. The mornings. You making tea. You and Hermione arguing in the kitchen about whether Ragnarok or McGonagall was right about something. He paused. I spent 3 years in Azkaban and 4 years getting to know you, and now you're going, and that's how it should be. That's exactly how it should be. He stopped. I know, Harry said. They sat together in the way they'd learned to sit together, the specific ease of two people who had come to each other late and made it work, and the London night did its thing outside, cars and buses and a fox somewhere in the garden making the sound foxes make. And Harry thought about the flat and Ragnarok's office and flourishes on Thursday afternoons and the ritual chamber and Sirius learning to make proper pasta and Mirabelle explaining magical theory with the intensity of someone who had been waiting for a student capable of receiving it, and all the other things that had been his life and that he was not leaving behind, only expanding from. The Horcruxes, Sirius said, after a while. I know. When Voldemort, I know, Sirius. You're going to tell me, Sirius said, and his voice was very quiet, if you need, whatever you need. You're going to say. I'll say, Harry said. He meant it completely. Because the plan we have is a good plan, Sirius said. Ragnarok's ritual for the simultaneous destruction, the containment vessels ready, the documentation in place. It's a good plan, and it works if we work it together, and it does not work if you decide to handle something alone because you think it'll be harder for other people to be involved. Harry looked at him. That's very specific. You have a habit, Sirius said. A kind one, mostly. Of making things easier for other people by dealing with them yourself. Harry thought about this honestly. I know, he said. I'm working on it. Good, Sirius said. He reached over and briefly, awkwardly, ruffled Harry's hair, a gesture that was pure James Potter instinct, something he'd done twice before and each time looked slightly surprised at himself. Now go to bed. Train's at 11. Harry went to bed. He lay in the dark and looked at the ceiling and thought about Hogwarts, about the entrance hall and the stone that had answered him and the 1,000-year-old enchantments and Ravenclaw's diadem and what it would feel like to have a class and a timetable and a house and 30 other children in a room learning something together. He thought about Dumbledore, who would be there, who would see him every day in that building and who had to reckon, every day, with the distance between what he had planned and what was. Harry had thought a great deal about whether he was angry at Dumbledore, and the honest answer was that it was more complicated than anger. It was the specific kind of grief that comes from understanding something precisely, understanding the reasoning, understanding the genuine good intentions twisted into something that damaged, understanding the specific tragedy of intelligence without accountability, and not being able to hate it cleanly because clean hate was simpler than what it actually was. He was going to have to be in a building with Albus Dumbledore for 7 years. He'd decided to go anyway. That was his. He fell asleep. Platform 9 3/4 was everything. Harry had been in Diagon Alley hundreds of times and had never fully got used to the specific quality of the wizarding world's casual coexistence with the impossible, but the platform was different from Diagon Alley. Diagon Alley was a marketplace. The platform was a threshold, the specific architecture of a departure point, people in cloaks and families saying goodbye and owls in cages and a scarlet steam engine that was quite simply magnificent, sitting there pouring steam into the September morning air like it had been doing this for 60 years and intended to continue indefinitely. Harry walked through the barrier with Sirius at his shoulder and Ragnarok on his other side. They had come together, which had drawn looks from the moment they'd appeared on the Muggle side of the barrier. A man with long dark hair and 2 new robes, a goblin in formal attire with a chain of office, and a dark-haired boy with a scar, and the platform received them, and Harry stopped and looked at the train. There it is, Sirius said, quietly. There it is, Harry agreed. Ragnar looked at the train with the expression of someone who finds large mechanisms moderately interesting and has more pressing logistical concerns. The documents are filed, he said. The board has confirmed receipt. McGonagall has acknowledged the monitoring prohibition. The proposal is formally in the queue for the September meeting. He looked at Harry. You have everything you need. Yes, Harry said. Send word if anything requires legal intervention. I will. Ragnar looked at him. The amber eyes, the weight of 7 years of mornings in the assessment room and the ritual chamber and the archive library and the kitchen table. You are, Ragnar said, and paused, and Harry recognized the pause as a goblin's version of a significant emotional moment, the pause you took when you were about to say something that exceeded your usual relational vocabulary. You have been an exceptional client. Harry looked at him. You've been an exceptional teacher, he said. And a very good friend, which I know you'll pretend is a sentimental interpretation. Ragnar's jaw moved slightly. It is a somewhat sentimental interpretation, he said, which does not make it inaccurate. He picked up his chain of office with one hand, the small adjustment he made when he was settling himself. Go, he said. You have things to do. Harry picked up his trunk. Sirius walked him down the platform to the train door and stood with him while other families surged around them with the particular organized chaos of every September 1st in the history of this platform, and Harry put his trunk in and turned back. Sirius looked at him. They'd said the important things last night. What was left was the moment itself, the specific unrepeatable quality of it, which both of them understood well enough not to try to resolve into words. Go be extraordinary, Sirius said. Which I'm aware is unnecessary advice. Harry looked at him. He thought about the vault in Gringotts and Ragnar's amber eyes and the carved chair and a boy who had been 4 years old and hadn't asked for things and had made lists. He thought about Hermione in flourishes on a Thursday and the diadem and the locket and the Wizengamot. He thought about Sirius on the floor of the sitting room with the stuffed owl held in both hands. He thought about Petunia at the kitchen sink looking out at the garden. I'll write, he said. Every week, Sirius said. Every week, Harry confirmed. He got on the train. He found a compartment near the back that was empty and put his trunk in the rack and sat down and looked out the window and watched the platform through the glass as it moved, as the people on it became smaller and Sirius's face became a particular shape in the crowd, and then the train curved and the platform was gone and there was just the English countryside, gold-green in the September morning, doing its unremarkable late summer thing. The compartment door opened. A boy stood there, round-faced, anxious, wearing robes that were slightly too formal for the train, as though someone had told him to make a good impression and he'd taken it seriously. He had dirt on one knee from the platform and was holding a toad that was doing its best to escape. Sorry, he said. Is this compartment taken? No, Harry said. Come in. The boy came in and sat down across from him. The toad made another escape attempt. I'm Neville, the boy said, wrestling the toad back. Neville Longbottom. Harry looked at him. He'd seen Neville at the Wizengamot, briefly, in the public gallery with his grandmother. He'd filed him under person who deserves better and had been waiting, in the vague and uninsistent way he had about things he couldn't immediately address, for the right moment to actually meet him. Harry Potter, he said. Neville looked at him with the expression everyone had when they heard that name, the processing moment, the recalibration, and then something else moved through his face, something more specific. I know who you are, he said. I saw you at the Wizengamot in October. When he stopped. When you said all that, about the Horcrux. My grandmother nearly fell out of her seat. Is she all right? Harry said, with genuine interest. She recovered, Neville said, with the slight dryness of someone used to managing a grandmother. She said afterward that you had nerve and that nerve was in short supply among contemporary wizards. He paused. I think that was a compliment. I'll take it, Harry said. Neville settled the toad on the seat beside him and looked at Harry with the careful attention of someone who has prepared for this moment and is checking their preparation against the reality. "I have a friend who says you're going to change everything," he said. "What do you think?" Harry said. Neville thought about it. "I think things needed changing," he said. "And I think," he paused, and something in his face was more honest than most adults managed. "I think I'd like to help. If there's a way I can." "I know I'm not," he stopped. "I'm not like you. I know that. But I'm also tired of being afraid of things." Harry looked at him for a moment. Neville Longbottom, whose parents were in St. Mungo's because of Voldemort's followers, whose whole life had been shaped around a tragedy he hadn't caused and a prophecy that had been about him almost as much as it had been about Harry, who had been told he was not enough in the specific insidious way the wizarding world told that to children it had decided were ordinary. "You're not like me," Harry said. "You're different from me. That's not the same thing." Neville looked at him. "And the help," Harry said, "is welcome. Genuinely." He meant it, and he let it be plain in his voice in the way he'd learned to let genuine things be plain. The train moved through the countryside. More students passed the compartment, peered in, moved on. A girl with red hair who Harry thought might be a Weasley stopped at the door, assessed the situation, and came in without asking. A boy with dark eyes and precise robes followed her, looked at Harry, looked at Neville, and sat down with the specific efficiency of someone who has calculated that this compartment is likely to be more interesting than the alternatives. Harry looked at all of them. New. Unknown. Complicated in the ways all people were complicated. The compartment filled up. McGonagall met the boats. She stood at the edge of the lake in the September evening with her tartan cloak and her eyes moving over the flotilla of first years as they crossed the still black water toward the castle, and when Harry's boat came in she looked at him directly for the length of a second, not with the helpless awe some adults directed at him, not with the political calculation others used. Just with the specific, clear-eyed assessment of a teacher looking at a student she has agreed to take on the full terms of, complications included. Harry looked back. The castle rose above them. 1,000 years of it, lit from within, alive in its own way, and Harry felt again what he'd felt in June standing in the entrance hall, the recognition, the settling, the sense of something that had been waiting. He stepped out of the boat and onto the bank and tilted his head back to look up at the towers and the lit windows and the impossible stubborn endurance of a thing that had been built with love and had kept most of it. Neville stepped out beside him and looked up too. "Brilliant," Neville said softly. "Yes," Harry said. They walked up together. The Great Hall was everything the Founding-era documents had described and better because documents couldn't carry the specific quality of the ceiling, which was enchanted to reflect the sky outside and was currently showing a thick scatter of September stars, or the 4 long tables with their candles and their noise and their accumulated decades of students who had sat in these seats and looked up at those stars and felt exactly this. Harry felt it. He let himself feel it, which was something he'd been getting better at. The Sorting Hat sat on its stool at the front. He was towards the middle of the alphabet, Potter, which meant a fair weight. He stood with the other first years and watched the hat do its work. It was old and patched and looked like it had opinions, which it did. He'd read about the sorting in the Founding-era documents. He'd been thinking about it for months. When McGonagall called his name, the Great Hall went quiet. Not entirely, there was still the ambient hum of 600 students, but a quality of attention sharpened throughout the room that Harry could feel like a change in air pressure. He walked up to the stool and sat down, and the hat came down over his eyes. It was dark inside the hat. Then the hat said, in a voice that was inside his head rather than in his ears, "Oh. Well. Hello," Harry said. "Harry Potter," the hat said, with the quality of something taking in a great deal of information simultaneously. "I've been waiting for you for a while. Not this year specifically. Just, since the last time I had a conversation rather than a sorting." "How often does that happen?" Harry said. "Not often," the hat said. You'd be surprised how many students sit down here and I have to argue with them about a placement they've already decided. You haven't decided. No, Harry said. Most people think they have. I know what I prefer, Harry said. But preference isn't the same as what's correct. You know the students better than I know myself at this point. That's an unusually honest thing for a first year to say. I try to be honest about what I know and what I don't. The hat was quiet for a moment, and Harry sat with the darkness of it and the weight of the room outside it and the 1,000-year history of the thing that had been placed over his head. You could be in any of them, the hat said. You genuinely could. That's not something I can say about most students. Gryffindor has your courage and your loyalty and the thing you do that I can only describe as forward motion. Ravenclaw has your mind, and your mind is exceptional, which the hat is saying is a hat that has met a great many minds. Slytherin has your strategy, your patience, your understanding of power. And Hufflepuff? Harry said. Hufflepuff, the hat said, and there was something almost fond in the hat's 1,000-year voice, has your willingness to do the work. To do it completely, without performing it, without needing recognition for it. Hufflepuff has the thing that got you here, not the power, not the strategy. The thing that made you stand in a ritual chamber for an hour and hold. Harry thought about that. Where do you want to be? The hat said. Not where you think you should be. Not where it's strategically advantageous. Where do you want to be? Harry thought about the founding-era documents and the room of requirement that had opened when he asked and the entrance hall stone that had answered him and Ragnar's you have things to do and Sirius's face through the train window and Neville in the boat looking up at the castle saying brilliant. Gryffindor, he said. Not because of the courage, or not only. Because of Sirius, and James, and Lily, who had all been there, and because of something in the castle that had pulled specifically toward that house the way a compass pulls toward north, and because he was done performing neutrality about things he genuinely felt. Excellent, said the hat, with the satisfaction of something that has been given an honest answer, and called out loud, Gryffindor. The Gryffindor table erupted. Harry took the hat off and put it back on the stool and walked to the table through the noise and sat down, and the noise continued around him, people he didn't know yet, faces he was going to know very well in 7 years, a life that was beginning in the specific irreversible way that things begin when you walk through a door you've been thinking about for a long time. He looked up at the ceiling. At the September stars. At the head table, Dumbledore was watching him. Across the distance of the great hall their eyes met, and Harry held the look for a moment, held it with the same steadiness he brought to everything, the steadiness that wasn't performed and wasn't distance but was simply the quality of someone who has done the work of knowing themselves, and then he looked away. Not dismissively. Not with hostility. Just, done. The moment complete. The eye contact sufficient for what it needed to be. He looked at the table around him. At Neville, who had been sorted Gryffindor 2 names before him and who caught his eye and looked relieved in the way of someone who had wanted to be somewhere and hadn't been sure they'd get it. Harry nodded once. Neville exhaled. The sorting continued. The candles burned above the 4 tables. The stars moved slowly across the enchanted ceiling in their ancient, indifferent patterns. Harry sat in his house at his school in the body that was entirely his, the mind that was entirely his, the magic that was entirely his, and felt the particular quality of a thing that has been worked toward for a long time finally being, simply, present. Not perfect. Not finished. Voldemort was still out there, still building, the soul fragment they'd removed was gone but the man was not, and there were 4 Horcruxes still to deal with and a battle still to come and a world that was still in the process of deciding what to do with the information he'd given it in the Wizengamot. Not finished. But his. Entirely, completely, irrevocably his. He picked up a piece of bread from the table as the food appeared, because Sirius was right that he didn't ask for things often enough and he was working on it, and he ate it, and the hall was full of noise and light and 700 people beginning a year, and outside the castle the September sky was the specific color of possibility. Harry Potter, who had been 4 years old and small and made lists with Y circled 3 times, who had sat in a goblin bank and had 89 chains removed from his bones and had learned what it felt like to be only himself and had found that himself was quite enough, looked at the stars above the enchanted ceiling and thought about everything that was coming. He wasn't afraid. He never had been, really. He just hadn't always known that about himself. Now he did.